action to a report.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Do you want to explain?
Yes. I am requesting to move this because under here, it discusses that it's the second reading. It was never on for a first reading. According to policy 208, all policies are to be presented twice and reviewed. These are also to be reviewed every 3 years. This has only been on the books for 6 months. It was never placed on an agenda initially. It was snuck into a packet and allowed discussion for 45 minutes without official guidance. And so I request that we move this from an action item to a report.
Okay, further discussion?
If we're looking to revoke the policy, why would it need to have been read? I mean, would that have been a requirement?
Director Onken, my understanding is that if you are revoking a policy, you do not need to have 3 readings. Director Cherry, do you have any thoughts on that? Is my understanding correct?
I'm just pulling up policy 208 right now, and it's the development, adoption, and implementation of policies. You're right, if there is substantial changes, you would require 2 initial readings, and then the adoption of a new policy would happen at a 3rd reading. The board is also able to take action on a policy if there are not substantial changes without previous readings. There's also language here that the school board shall review policies at least once every 3 years. I'm not finding anything about a minimum time frame for review.
Do you see anything there that talks about a revocation, though?
No, I don't.
Did we make substantial changes to this policy?
Well, revoking
Yes.
it would be a substantial change.
That is a substantial change.
Did we make substantial changes to the policy as it was?
Removing it is substantial. There's been no discussion about removing or revoking.
The 721.1 is not being replaced by anything. There is a new one called 721. So it's not being changed, it's just being revoked.
Correct. There's been no discussion regarding revoking that policy. This is the first time it's been placed on the agenda for discussion.
You have always
All
requested
right, so
revocation.
let's ask to be recognized. Director Corbani.
Thank you. But you've always requested revocation, so I'm not sure how it wasn't discussed.
I've never, if I may, I've never requested revocation of this policy. I've requested it to be placed on agendas for discussion, which I've been denied.
Any other comments?
Yeah, sorry.
Director Hockert.
Thank you. So Director Eiley, I think you do have a point. You're right, we didn't actually bring this forward as a discussion item. However, I was under the impression that a revocation was kind of a different kind of animal, that this was something that did not need multiple readings, that it did come up for discussion during a board meeting, and that we are now going forward as a policy committee with our recommendation to revoke it. So I guess we're on a technicality here. My understanding, and I did run this by MSBA to ask specifically if we need multiple readings, and their answer was, no, this is not something that, revocations are something else. So unless we need to double check that, I guess that's up for the board to decide. My understanding is that we are able to go forward with revoking this policy without having an official report going forward. But if more members would like a report, I guess that's open for discussion.
Director Sherman.
Yes, I'm just wondering, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of I'm getting used to being away and remote when you guys are all there, so I'm hearing a lot, but not maybe everything. Was it addressed if Director Riley let the chair know in advance of the meeting that she would be making this agenda change?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Director Weisberg.
When the other policy, 721, came up, I specifically asked if policies would be revoked, but at that time, it was never discussed that 721.1 was being considered because it's a specifically different policy. And I understand that you talked to MSBA, but that's not even an MSBA policy. That's a policy that we felt we needed for our district because of prior issues we've had as a district, and administration helped write this policy. So the fact that it's just coming now as an action item just to get rid of it, which is going to completely decrease transparency right before a levy, which is a disaster, and it never came for discussion, it's just landed on here, is wrong.
Director Parvani.
Thank you. You know, I'm a bit concerned that there is discussion here that we haven't talked about this. We've talked about
Exactly.
this before. We have talked about this policy before. Dr. Cherry, can you please explain what the difference is between the policy that we're about to revoke and the one that we're putting on the agenda? What is the difference specifically?
Director Porbeni, can you explain which two policies you're talking about?
The 721 and the 721.1.
Sure. 721, the policy that is up for recommended adoption this evening is about our uniform grant guidance policy. It has to do with procurement and specifically around funds that are coming from the federal government. 721.1 is a policy that discusses procedures for administration to follow in terms of contracts and expenditures and procedures for how those come forward for adoption or for approval.
So 721.1 is the implementation, is the process of implementation of what you just talked about. So I don't know why that's an issue. I still don't understand why. Okay, go ahead, Liz. I mean, I want to understand what your concerns are.
Director Weisberg.
They don't have anything to do with each other. 721 is about grants. 721.1 is about the procedure administration goes about to approve contracts. So approving 721 doesn't affect 721.1. They can both exist at the same time. It's not the same as having a policy that replaces another policy. They're two separate issues. Apologize for my phone.
Okay.
Okay, Director Sherman.
Isn't there a policy that if we're going to have these kind of conversations that they should come to the board before, like within 24 to 48 hours? I'm just not inclined to change the agenda at this point in time. It's been stated previous board meetings that we are replacing one financial policy with 5 financial policies. It's going to be more robust. It's going to be more in line with what other districts are doing. It's going to enable our staff to reevaluate the procedures, which is actually their job. We're policy governance, and I think we're adding in a more robust policy. We're stepping out of the staff's work in terms of writing procedures. So I'm not inclined to play this game of bringing up something like this at the top of a meeting. I think that it should have been brought up beforehand. That's just my personal opinion, so.
Director Riley.
Well, I'd like to disagree with you wholeheartedly. There is no game here. Whether you like to play games or not, this is serious business, and this is about transparency to the community. You're dealing with the community funds. This procedure and alignment with how information is delivered to the board came with reason. And it was a reconciliation attempt with the community so that they could trust this administration and this board financially moving forward. That was supposed to help with future bond issues, future levy issues, and by removing this, you're removing that. And what I see in front of me that you say that MSBA has, MSBA does not have a policy like this, and quite frankly, this policy is much more structured, and it's not a procedure of administration. Nobody told administration how to do their work behind the scenes. They developed that on their own. This is basically a procedure to deliver information to the board so that the board is entitled to know what funds it's coming out of. So the board is entitled to all the background information, including contracts, and even including RFPs. These are things the board never had access to without a fight. And taking this away is bad practice. Period, it's bad practice.
Director Propini.
Thank you. I think we need to be careful when we're trying to provide a justification as to why something should be or shouldn't be by mentioning previous practices, because there's nothing to show that previous practices. So we really need to be careful when we make accusations. We shouldn't be tying this to whatever it is that might have happened or not happened, because there's a legal case going on. So I want us to be careful when we make statements. This has nothing to do with whatever it is that was there in the past. I have no information, neither do I have any idea as to what you're talking about. So I'm going to say it right here, that we should please be very careful. This policy was written specifically to support a process. Like Director Sherman said, it is not our responsibility to speak for the administration in terms of how they should apply or do their work. I do understand where you're coming from, but I still don't understand why you're tying this to something, and you're tying it to bond and levy. What is the relationship there? If we talk about transparency, there's so many things we can talk about transparency in terms of the former board, but we're not going to go there. We can't pretend that everything was perfect with respect to what the previous board did. That's not our responsibility to go back and juggle minds. What we need to do is to allow the administration to do their job. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
We are going to be discussing this later on in the meeting, so I feel as though most everybody is understanding what is before them in terms of a vote, so I'd like to go ahead and take this vote, and we will be discussing this issue later on in the meeting. Superintendent Lansfeld, did you have your hand up?
I just wanted to mention that we did and have had this 721 policy in place, working together as a leadership team. Our goal is to be transparent. We never not want to be transparent with the public. It's very important. Working with the policy committee, Dr. Cherry and our leadership team have reviewed the policies and feel strongly that the MSBA 700s will help support that transparency. We're still keeping a $50,000 tracking sheet with the contracts, and we believe that this will provide even more transparency than what we have had with the 700 policies.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote on this amendment to the agenda. All those in favor of amending the agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Nay.
Nay.
Okay, the motion does not pass. So now I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Director Onken, second. Director Porbani. All those in favor of adopting the agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes. Okay, we'll move on to recognition.
Okay, thank you, Chair Petrie and fellow board directors. We have 3 groups of students tonight that we would like to recognize, and I will turn the time over for our first recognition to Dr. Cherry.
Wonderful. And I am going to ask Shad Abu Hakil to come forward, and our media teachers that are here with us tonight. You could come forward. Thank you. Stillwater Area High School senior Shad Abu Hakil, and actually graduate now, not just senior, graduate, as well as another one of our students from the high school, sophomore, now junior, Thua El-Dokil. We're invited by elementary media specialists to talk with students as part of a lesson using the book Under My Hijab by Henna Khan. The pair created a video that was shown to all elementary students in the district to explain what hijab is and why someone may wear it. In the video, they showed the younger students the different ways to wear the hijab and talked about their experiences wearing it, both positive and negative. Media specialists showed the video during their classes and also held 2 Zoom meetings where I was able to participate as a viewer in one of those, where the younger students could meet both Shad and Thua live. And let me tell you, they are stars. These students asked their own questions about the hijab and the Muslim culture, and these 2 high school students documented all of the questions that they received from the elementary students, and all of those questions filled more than 28 pages. So we had very curious students and just amazing student leaders that were able to share their experiences. So thank you. And Shad, if you want to just introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about the experience that you had, and then also if the teachers want to also share a little bit about the project.
Thank you. My name is Shad, and it was a pleasure to work with these amazing ladies. I mean, honestly, talking about the hijab isn't really like popular, especially like in the school, in the school. So I wanted to just bring a positive image about why it's important to talk about it and why I personally wear it, and kind of address those popular stereotypes. And just to emphasize to students that this symbolizes freedom, not oppression. So yeah. And also I want to thank Mr. A also for introducing me to Ms. Tuager, our media specialist here. So thank you everyone for the love and support.
And we did prepare a few words to say to you. When we first read through the books we would be using to build our curriculum for last year, we never could have imagined the journey we were joining. Under My Hijab presented such an opportunity for our readers and ourselves as educators. Knowing we could not tell this story with authenticity, we reached out to Eric and Cornelius with a seed of an idea. They connected us to Thua and Shad, who grew this little seed of an idea into the project that it is today. Their openness and vulnerability gave us the opportunity to learn about the importance of the hijab along with our students. Along this journey, we were reminded that collaboration between colleagues and students results in lessons with deeper connections with our learners and therefore more concrete learning. We were reminded that students have just as much, if not more, to teach us and others in our classroom. We were reminded how to use our humility when teaching and listening to our students and those who know more than us. We were reminded that thinking outside the box when creating a lesson can result in something more beautiful than we could have ever imagined. And we plan to carry what we've learned during this collaborative process with us as we create curriculum in the future. So Thua and Shad, thank you. We cannot thank you enough for your willingness to work with us and our young learners.
And we wanted to present you this, You Make a Difference, and it's a certificate for outstanding contribution to education. So thank you, and I have one for Thua too, so thank you.
Shad, what are your plans next year?
I'm planning to attend the University of Minnesota to study biology.
Shad, I'd like to say one thing to you. I know you personally. You're my daughter's friend. Congratulations. I'd like to encourage you to continue to do what you do. There's a lot of children out there that are very curious. They're not only learning, but it's a great opportunity for them to also understand and be aware of other cultures, and something they would have probably never been able to learn if it wasn't for you. So please don't stop. You probably don't know how much difference you make in people's lives. As kids move around the world, for some of us that are international, we know the impact of being international, and it's a great opportunity, great knowledge, great learning for us. So giving people that same opportunity so they're not shocked when they go to other places is a great thing that you're doing. So I would encourage you to continue, because you're surely having an impact in the lives of those that never thought they could have this opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shad. I watched that video, and I was just thoroughly entranced by it. And I'm sure that the students were too. And it was entertaining, it was educational. I mean, I learned things that I didn't know. And so I want to just thank you and Thua for taking the time to do something like that. It was very generous of you. So thank you very much on behalf of the whole board.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, could I have the Stillwater Black Bowling Team members come up, please? So the Stillwater Black Bowling Team took first place in the Class AA Junior Varsity State Tournament. And congratulations to you. And I did not have a bowling team when I went to high school. And so I thought this was pretty neat to hear your accomplishments. And if you'd like to let us know a little bit about it and introduce yourselves.
Matthew, go ahead. I'm Matthew Meyer, and I just finished 8th grade at the Stillwater Middle School.
Thank you.
What's your high score, Matthew?
233.
Nice.
Okay, thank you.
Our senior.
I'm Alexis Peterson. I just graduated high school from Stillwater, actually. Duh. Okay. Anyways. And I don't know what else.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Ashley Gorman. I just finished 9th grade at the Stillwater High School.
Thank you.
I'm CJ Walsh. I just finished 9th grade at Stillwater High School.
Thank you.
Our head coach, Jesse Curtis, and our assistant coach, Rich Warren.
Thank you. And I'd like to know where you practice.
Stillwater Bowl.
Stillwater Bowl.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So we've had a high school bowling team for quite a few years now. Brought back from 95, I think was the last year, and then it got brought back a few years ago now. So these kids are all on the junior varsity team, and we have 2 JV teams and 1 varsity team.
Wow, good club, good club.
Yep. Lots of scholarship opportunities for college for bowlers, so that's why we encourage it.
Thank you.
Congrats.
That's really great. I mean, so thank you for coming here. I'm just sort of curious, so who was your biggest competition? Who did you have to beat to get to this title? Anybody want to answer that?
In our division, it was Tartan, but for state, it was actually Park.
Okay, okay. Well, way to go, Stillwater. You have made us proud, and thanks for coming here tonight so that we can honor you. I'm really honored to say thank you for what you did. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Okay, next I would like our member of our bridge transition team to come up, Nevin and Ms. Willis. Okay, I was so excited to read this news story and want to share our congratulations to this group of students. Students from our Bridge Transition Program have successfully been showing at the SkillsUSA Minnesota State Championships and Leadership Conference. They swept the employment application process competition with Nevin winning gold, Chaz earning silver, and Juan awarded bronze. SkillsUSA is a partnership of students, teachers, and industry working together to ensure America has a skilled workforce. The organization provides educational programs, events, and competitions that support career and technical education in the nation's classrooms. So congratulations to our Bridge Transitions program. Congratulations.
So I'll get you started. Okay. So we have three fabulous gentlemen. Nevin gets to represent all of them tonight. Two of them are working, which is exactly what we want all of our students to be doing as they kind of pursue their next post-secondary step. So I am very, very proud that I get to represent. Our teachers are enjoying their summer break, so I get to represent as the administrator for the Bridge Transition Program with Nevin. And one thing that I will say that's unique and wonderful about our SkillsUSA chapter is that it is the only chapter in the metro area that is embedded into the curriculum coursework at the transition program. So all students at our program have access to SkillsUSA classes and activities and competitions through their participation in our 18 to 21 program. And I would love for you to just share a little bit about what it was like to participate in SkillsUSA and what specifically you did for the competition, Nevin.
For our classes, we competed in the employment and application process, or the application and interview process is what we did. So that is going through, filling out, this year since of COVID, we went through and did an online application and then did a Zoom interview. And that was really interesting because I'm so used to doing everything in person. So it was a new experience. It was really exciting and really nerve-wracking at the same time.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think we're all sort of a little nerve-wracked by Zoom, so you're not the only one. Well, congratulations. Was it a sort of a lengthy process? Did you have a long interview, or how did that work?
It really didn't take that long. They're really organized. So the application took about maybe, I think, 10 or so minutes, 10, 15, depending on how quickly you could remember your information.
Mm-hmm.
And then the interview, I think, was also maybe 5-10 minutes. I honestly can't remember the exact time. And they went over some common interview questions and just kind of got to learn about each other for a minute.
Well, congratulations to you and your classmates. I'm sure you learned a lot from that experience, right?
Yes, very much.
Yeah, you're
And
going to take that.
I'm really excited to continue through our program too.
Yep, you can take that forward into life, right?
Mm-hmm. That's the goal.
Well, thank you so much for coming here tonight, and congratulations again. That's a really wonderful honor for you and your classmates.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to open forum. And we have one speaker this evening. If you wish to speak to the school board, you will be able to do so at the start of the school board meeting during open forum. You may sign in only for yourself, not for other individuals or groups, and only in person. The sign-in sheet is made available 30 minutes prior and up to the start of the meeting. Due to time limitations, we will limit the number of speakers to 15, with each speaker receiving 3 minutes. If you spoke at the last meeting, please consider allowing others to sign in before you. After you address the board, please leave the podium. Stillwater Area School District welcomes input from citizens as community involvement fosters better decision-making and improved learning experiences for all students. While comments and questions are welcome during open forum, law prohibits the board from discussing concerns about individual employees or students in a public meeting. We will stop the proceedings immediately if employee or student privacy issues are raised and direct the speaker to forward comments regarding individual employees or students to the superintendent. Because we are modeling civil discourse for our community, speakers must present their testimony in a respectful manner. Vulgarity, character attacks, malice, or specific complaints identifying staff or students by name or implication will not be permitted. The board will not deliberate, discuss, or engage in conversation with speakers during open forum. However, the board may ask administration to review the concerns presented. If you want to receive follow-up from the board or administration, please ensure you include your email address on the sign-in form. Thank you. And with that, our speaker tonight is Lisa Williams.
I haven't been to a school board meeting before. So I guess my first comment is I don't find your setup very welcoming. And when I'm sitting out there, all I'm hearing is voices, and I don't know who was talking. My reason for being here tonight, and I had a difficult time going through the board website, so I did not find that I see on the agenda all the new policies that you're going to be approving this evening. But I did appreciate the conversation that happened earlier, because I am here to talk to you about 721.1. And it should be a hard no. This should not be revoked. And in fact, I would request you go back and review this with state statute. And I've been on boards and councils before, so I am aware of how these state statutes work. And even the fact that a working group was given permission to do anything over $25,000 is not following state statute for the board. And you mentioned it in your paperwork that the legal references were Minnesota State Statute 471.345. If you go to that state statute, it clearly states any contracts exceeding $25,000 is to be done by sealed bid. And sealed bid also has to follow state law when they're opened. It's not a working group job. It's the board's job. Any contracts for less than $25,000, as you continue to read through the state statute, it will take you into 16.C28. In that state statute, when you are awarding contracts under $25,000, there are still state laws you need to follow in reference to employment, which then carries you into contract awards and state statute of 177.43. So currently, the policy as written isn't following state statute. And to revoke the policy and not have the board involved in spending taxpayers' dollars is not okay with me as a taxpayer. And as someone who has a student in the school district and who has approved levies all along in the 17 plus years I've lived in this district, I'm thinking long and hard on my vote come November. There's been irresponsible spending all along. And now you're trying to get rid of a procedure that holds you accountable. And this procedure didn't even follow state statute. I don't even know how it got approved this way. Do you not have legal counsel to help you walk you through state statutes? I mean, where boards and city councils I've been involved on, we've always had attorneys. I appreciate my time is up, but there's no one else here. So I'm not gonna stay for the whole night, but I am gonna get my hands on all these new policies. And I am gonna come back. If we're gonna stop watching how money is spent in this district, and I voted for some of you folks, you promised to be financially responsible. And we all know what's gone wrong prior to this year. So to take away a policy that is holding this board responsible financially on spending is not okay. And I honestly don't know how it works with superintendents or assistant superintendents, but my high schooler didn't go to school for an entire year, except for a few weeks in September. I want you folks to be focusing on work groups that focus on education. I don't want you being worried about contracts. That's not your job. For me, your job is education and overseeing it. And our students were cheated. Nobody's fault. I'll give you that. But come fall, I want to see the science followed, the masks gone, our students back in this building, and having the experience they're entitled to. My student passed being on Zoom all year. Do you know why? Because in 8th grade, she took all advanced classes. So her freshman year on Zoom was a review. I know other students didn't have it that easy. Your focus needs to be on education. It is not sitting here writing policies on how this board is going to spend money that you get from people like me.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, we will move on to the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you, Chair Petrie and Board Directors. Last week was a flutter of activity, but things are definitely quieting down as students began summer break this week. I want to give a big thank you to our community for all of the support they gave to our graduating seniors. Hundreds of people lined the streets of Stillwater on a very hot Saturday afternoon to cheer them on during the pony parade. And many other individuals and businesses helped them celebrate all of their accomplishments by organizing and donating to the senior all-night party at Pins. Many of our new graduates will be returning to campus one last time this weekend for prom, which is being held for the first time ever outdoors at our Pony Stadium. I also want to thank the Partnership Plan for sponsoring the Distinguished Alumni Dinner the night before the senior graduation ceremony. We have some absolutely outstanding Stillwater alumni that have made such a positive difference in our community and many others. Also, according to data released by the Minnesota Department of Education, Stillwater Area High School had a graduation rate of 96.6% in 2020, up from 95.3% or 95.8% the previous year. A total of 644 students graduated from Stillwater Area High School last year. Overall, the district's graduation rate in 2020 was 93.5, which includes students at St. Croix Valley Area Learning Center, as well as special education students who can stay enrolled in our schools until they are 21 years old. Stillwater area students are continuing to graduate at a higher rate than their peers across the state. The state average in 2020 was 83.8%. We're hearing some good news for the fall. Drug makers are saying a COVID-19 vaccine may be available to children between the ages of 5 and 11 years old by September. Having more students vaccinated would certainly help us get back to a more normal school year, which I know we're all longing for next year. Also, we've received some questions in recent weeks about our curriculum and what equity work really means. I'm hearing from other superintendents that this is a trend happening across the state. These concerns are frequently raised by non-parents and even more often by individuals who do not live within the district's boundaries. I would encourage anyone with questions or concerns to reach out to us directly for accurate information. As a public school district, we are working to remove barriers so all students have the resources and opportunities to succeed. We teach our students to be critical thinkers, to consider multiple perspectives, and to treat others with kindness and respect. We know these are values shared by our community as well. We are grateful for our residents' continued support of their public schools. It takes all of us working together to care for our kids. And just one last reminder that we are continuing to provide free meals to our students all summer long. Breakfast and lunch are served each weekday at Brookview Elementary, Lake Elmo Elementary, and Stillwater Middle School. You can also pick up a week's worth of meals every Friday at Stillwater Area High School. More details are on our district's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Lansfeld. We're going to move on now to the consent agenda. I am going to pull out J because that is an item that we will need to do a roll call vote on. Director Riley.
Could I pull out D, please?
D. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I will entertain a motion. Well, first I'm going to read these items. The consent agenda includes minutes of May 27th, closed meeting, minutes of May 27th, regular meeting, minutes of May 27th, closed meeting, the disbursement register, Power School Student Information System licensing fee, JPA Matamidi Nutrition Services Contract, Northeast Metro 916 Nutrition Services Contract, Penkalo 916 Nutrition Services Contract, St. Croix Catholic Schools Nutrition Services Contract, Northeast Metro 916 Long-Term Facilities Maintenance Budget, and the Human Resources Personnel Report. Can I get a motion to approve consent agenda items A, B, C, E, F, G, H, I, and K? So Director Hockert, second, Director Sherman. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, Director Riley, would you like to take the D?
Absolutely. Hi, John. So if we go to page 11 in the disbursements, this is probably more towards John Perry. Innovative Office Solutions, there is an expense for $4,001.95 for equipment.
You're talking to, which John are we talking to?
Well, you're the guy in charge, but if
All
John
right.
Perry wants to pop in
And
or if you know
that's-
the explanation, that's great.
It's tech, these are called goosenecks evidently, and that's what we purchased, a number of goosenecks. And there was some technical support provided by Innovative Office Solutions.
Okay.
And the check and the PO are available for anybody who'd like to take a look at it. It's public record.
Okay. So are we still spending on this space, or are we continued? Does anybody know? You don't know? I threw one on you there.
That one I'm not sure of. I think that John has, he's been very successful in spending, so I think we're pretty well caught up.
Okay, thank you. And then on page 12.
Yep.
There is a book, Minnesota Historical Society, called Spark. Let's see, the description on that book is Reflections on Race in Minnesota in the Wake of George Floyd's Death and the Uprisings that Followed, as told by current and former residents of the state. Brief description, May 25th, George Floyd, an unarmed black man, was killed by Minneapolis police officers, sparking months of unrest at home and around the world. As millions took to the streets to express their outrage and speak out against systemic racism, injustice, and institutionalized violence, the city of Minneapolis and its residents were deeply shaken. For many, George Floyd's murder and the ensuing uprisings shattered the city's reputation for progressive ideals and a high quality of life. For many others, the incident simply caught on camera a representation of the harsh realities and paradoxes that they have been living with for generations. In the words of Jasmine Mitchell, the Minnesota nice, comforts, and illusionary progressiveness resides upon the ignoring of white racial terrorism and fears of blackness, brown immigrants, and resistance to white supremacy. So that's just a piece of that. Do we know who ordered this book or where that?
I could look that up, and there is a PO on that book, and I didn't get to it today.
Okay.
But I would be able to do that.
Thank you. I don't know if anybody else knows about it at the table. Okay, thank you. I would appreciate that. One more question, page 20.
I'm sorry, I just had a question on that, sorry.
Director Sherman.
Is it appropriate to identify the person's name who bought a book? Or I just want to make sure that it feels a little bit like we're targeting, and I don't know any of the background on, I'm assuming that the book was purchased for a purpose. I'm trying to understand. I think it's one thing to identify why it was bought and what we're doing with the book and
I think all that's
the
public
perspectives.
information.
Yeah, I guess for me, it just feels a little inappropriate. If it's fine, I guess it's fine. I find it a little cringeworthy that we're identifying a certain person and what we would do with that. I don't understand. But I just want to go back to, if we could look at the curriculum as a whole and put things out there. I guess I just don't understand when we passed a racial justice statement last summer, and both Directors Riley and Directors Weisberg were on the board that approved that. And I guess I'm just finding a hard time why we're picking on equity books that are being bought, just to understand perspectives and fulfill. I mean, honestly, it was the direction of the board to kind of understand BIPOC perspectives based on events that transpired both within our district and in the state last summer. So it just feels like, let's get to the root of why we're doing this. I don't know what it is. I'm terribly confused. And I just want to have an honest conversation without picking one book at a time. So I don't know, Superintendent, if we can have some curriculum report, if we can, I mean, are we reevaluating our racial justice statement? Because I've been rereading it, and it absolutely says we're going to, as a board, work to hear and listen to other perspectives. I guess I'm just confused. I'll leave it at that.
I mean, I would actually applaud the person who purchased that book, because I think that what they're doing is exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and that is to understand other perspectives, including the students in our schools who represent, you know, disadvantaged populations. I mean, we've had a tremendous rise in the number of BIPOC students over the last decade. We really should be understanding them. So I guess I fail to understand too why you're calling that out, Director Riley.
To understand. I don't know who bought the book. I don't know what the intentions of the book were. I'm asking to understand. I don't know the purpose. This is taxpayer money, and it is public information. And if it's a part of, is it for curriculum? Is it intended for class? I don't know. I'm getting many conversations from community members wondering what the curriculum is in the classroom. So I'm asking a question to find information.
Is this a $10 book, Director Riley?
That is irrelevant. That is absolutely irrelevant. And being condescending to fellow board members at the table is not okay for raising questions.
I agree. Being condescending is not a good thing. Director Corbani.
Thank you. You know, I have been on this board since January. I'm the only black woman, black person on this board. And I have known, and time again, you've had issues with anything that has to do with diversity. I say this because I've kept quiet, but going forward, it's not going to happen anymore. Because you're not only trying to quiet the voices of the minority students here, you have heard a lot, I have heard a lot as well. If we bring the curriculum to the space, there are contents within the curriculum the minority students would tell you they're uncomfortable with. But because of an open mind, orientation, and things that they need to understand, that is the difference between kids like that and you. I'm sorry to say. I pay taxes, and a lot of black people in this community pay taxes too. You are going to pick on a book that impacts me and my family, and a lot of people within the community, and you think for $10 or whatever that amount is, you're going to always pick on something that impacts me and my family. So for you, there's dissent. I shouldn't have a voice. Neither should the kids that attend Stillwater Area High School have a voice. You don't speak for any one of those children. And our kids in this community have a right to learn. If we bring the curriculum to the center of this page, I will provide you with a lot of books that makes me uncomfortable. But you know what the truth is? We all have to learn. Our kids tell us that these books make them uncomfortable, but they have to learn. That's part of the process. That is the curriculum. Because things are said in those books doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to open up your mind and learn. For you, maybe that's a problem. But for a lot of the kids out there, including the white kids in our community, you don't speak for them. You might speak for yours and your group. You don't speak for mine and my group and a lot of the white kids in this community. These books are there for our children to learn. You have to give them a chance not to be like you and I going forward. If you continue to pick on books that focuses specifically on minority kids, I will be forced to respond to you in ways that I never thought I would respond. I say this because I pay taxes too.
That is threatening.
And a lot of the kids in this community, a lot of the parents in this community pay taxes too. You have threatened me sitting down here.
Table.
You have threatened me sitting down on this board. And I repeat it, Director Riley, it's not going to continue anymore.
Okay, thank you, Director Corbini. Did you have more?
I'm not the one who continued on with these questions, actually. I inquired on a question, And I'm being told by board members in here that it is a curriculum. I would like further insight. And I'm sorry that.
I don't think anyone said it was curriculum.
I've heard 2 board members call it curriculum, but my point is, nobody knows my story. I have never passed judgment on your story, and let's keep our
That's what you
personal
do
things.
every day on the board.
All right, Director Perbini, please.
Okay, I have one more, if we can go down to page 20, please.
Page 20, okay.
Ready?
Yeah,
So,
I'm
Clear
ready.
Channel Outdoor, the billboard ad and the vinyl banner, $2,650 and $550, total of $3,200. My question is that a monthly fee? Was there duration of that? Do we know?
I can answer that, Director Riley. We have placed a billboard along 94 in Woodbury. It was a 5-week term, and then it will be taken down. We are planning to put it up again in October. And this, again, it'll be a little bit less that time because we do have the vinyl banner now printed already. That is something that we own, so it's just the actual cost to rent the space in October.
Thank you.
You're
That's what
welcome.
I was looking for. I
Yep.
appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, last question, John. How many salt shakers are there in the middle school cafeterias?
374.
Perfect.
I don't know, I'm sorry.
That's all. I move to if there aren't any other questions, pass the rest of the consent agenda.
We have one. to vote on
I
yet.
think you're
sorry.
moving D.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Director Onken, okay, all those in favor of accepting the consent agenda, item D, aye? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Director Riley, these are all questions that could be easily clarified if you were to get in touch with the appropriate people.
I did.
Can you please do that in the future so that we do not spend time at the board table getting questions answered that could very easily be answered before this board meeting?
I'm sorry, you're trying to silence me, Chair.
No, I'm telling you that if you have questions, they can easily be answered in advance of this meeting, and we don't have to take 10
Chair,
or
I
15
did
minutes.
speak with Mr. Tyne prior. We've had good conversations, and I am allowed to highlight things for community members and bring things out into public. Is this disbursement register made public yet? Is it attached to the documentation for the community yet?
It is not, as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
Can we have that happen? Is that possible?
That's a good question.
I think we need to look into it.
Perhaps if we did that, then we wouldn't have to spend this time at the board table
Agreed.
talking about these items.
I'll look into that and get back to the chair.
Thank you. All right, item J. Director Drummerhausen, would you like to speak to that?
Yep, this is the 916 Long-Term Facility Maintenance Plan. There are 13 member districts. The 916 is looking to do $142,000 worth of work. Of the 13 districts, our portion of that is $15,415.56. So they need approval from all 13 districts before they can move forward with their work. So this is just their part of their annual long-term facility maintenance coming forward, each of the districts. Our portion is a little over $15,000 and looking approval for 916 to have access to their long-term facility maintenance funds.
Okay, and this item is one that we do need to have a roll call on. But first, can I get a motion to approve this? Director Hockert, second. Director Porbani. Joan, would you like to do the roll? Sorry, just a second. Director Onken?
Yeah, since I work for District 916, I will abstain from voting on this
Okay,
one.
sounds good. Joan, can you take the roll?
Director Hacker?
Yes.
Director Porbeni?
Yes.
Director Riley?
Yes.
Director Sherman?
Yes.
Director Weisberg?
Yes.
Chair Petrie?
Yes.
You have a 6-1 vote, 601 vote. Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, we're moving on to the reports. The first one is Read Well by third grade. Karen Lateral.
Good evening, Board Chair Petrie, Superintendent Lansfeld, Dr. Cherry, members of the board, directors. I'm happy to be here tonight to talk to you about Read Well by third grade. I believe there is a PowerPoint available, correct? You may recall last year was quite brief. This is an annual report that I give, and the report is very similar each year, but I will point out areas that have been updated. So our purpose is to adhere to, well, to communicate with the community, but also to adhere to Minnesota Statute 120B.12 to provide information to the stakeholders of our community about how we are working toward helping our students become better readers by third grade. There are several parts in the statute that we really need to pay attention to, and if you had a chance to look through the plan that was submitted with the board packet, you'll notice that these 4 areas, these 4 bullet points, are listed in the plan and explained in greater detail. So essentially, we need to provide a process to assess students' level of reading proficiency, a process to notify and involve parents, a description of how we administer interventions, how we determine what interventions are needed, and how we target and modify those interventions for students, how we monitor their progress to make sure the interventions are working, and that making sure that we're using evidence-based interventions with students who are not reading at or above grade level. And on the next slide, we also need to identify staff development needs, including approaches to support our English learners' strengths in their native languages so that we can help them bridge into English, recognizing their first language as an asset that they can build on, and ensuring that our teachers are well-trained in culturally responsive pedagogy. And we need to make sure that we post our plan on the website, and we do that every year after it's approved. It won't be approved tonight, it'll be approved at our next board meeting, hopefully. So our primary goal is to help every child read at or above grade level by third grade. This year, we decided to include the World's Best Workforce goal that we developed with the World's Best Workforce Subcommittee. This is a SMART goal, so it's a little bit wordy. But essentially, in order to meet that Read Well by third grade goal, we are targeting specifically our younger students. So you'll see that this goal talks about helping our first grade students meet proficiency, moving from 57% on the FastBridge composite score. That's a screening assessment that we use 3 times a year. And then moving to 59% or exceeding that by spring. Now you'll notice that the data that we are using is from 2019. We did not collect spring data last year because of COVID. And I'd also like to point out that 2019 was the first year that we implemented our new phonics curriculum. So that 57% was based on a year 1 implementation. I am hoping that we will far exceed the goal that we've set here. This is pretty standard of what we talk about. We screen students to see who might need a closer look, and we have the screeners listed up there. And once we determine which students might need additional enrichment or additional intervention support, then we look at their needs. And I'm speaking specifically tonight about students who need additional support and intervention. And for those students, we administer diagnostic assessments, and you can see those listed up there. One that we've added over the last 2 years, it's been used sporadically, but we've made it a commitment to use it as a standard part of our diagnostic assessments, is the phonemic awareness skills test, in addition to the other assessments that are up there. So you'll see that that's in red. And then we progress monitor as the kids are receiving their interventions. And what that means is we test them on the skill that we're teaching them. Depending on the level of the student, we might test them, well, we do test them every week if they're receiving an intervention, just to make sure that the intervention is working, because we don't want to waste time. We want to make sure that we get them caught up as quickly as possible. And you can see some of the variety of assessments that we have listed up there. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you want to look at any of this at another time. We also do quite a bit of parent notification and involvement. We could always do more, and so this is not something, it's not as though we're resting on our laurels or anything like that. In Tier 1 and Tier 2, which is the primary classroom teacher, we have weekly communications going home from the buildings. The classrooms might have weekly to monthly communications that go home to families. We have parent-teacher conferences, that's pretty standard, and school-wide activity nights, and we have a variety of volunteering opportunities as well. For Tier 3, which is our intensive pull-out interventions for our reading students who are struggling the most, who need the most support prior to special education support, we provide communication with intervention eligibility when a student becomes eligible. We provide their screening data. The interventionists are asked to provide weekly general communication to the families of the kids in their program, and then also to make at least one time a month very specific, student-specific outreach to the family in some way, whether it's a phone call or an email or a seesaw message that is specific to their student to talk about progress. Twice a year, we provide progress reports for families. Interventionists do everything they can to jump into or schedule into parent-teacher conferences with the classroom teacher, and they offer conferences when they have conflicts because, you know, sometimes they might be needed in 2 places or 3 places at once. And so they'll offer conferences for families as well, if necessary. And then they participate in school-wide activity nights to help provide parents with, to welcome parents into the building, to help them understand what's happening in intervention and how parents can help at home. This year was really unique. Our interventionist had some really creative ways to involve parents. We didn't really have those school-wide activity nights, but I'm really proud of the work that the interventionists did to continue to engage parents remotely. Oops. So when we think of interventions, we generally think of 3 tiers prior to special education. Tier 1 is in the classroom, and that might be an on-the-spot type intervention, small groups, things like that. Tier 2 is when the teacher recognizes that students need a little bit more support in the classroom, and then they pull specific groups during an intervention period to provide a more targeted intervention for students on a specific skill that they might need. And then Tier 3 is a very targeted pull-out intervention with intervention specialists who have a variety of different training. And then we also provide summer success opportunities. This year we're using our Letterland curriculum, and we have 4 teachers and 4 I can't call them youth teachers, I'll call them youth teachers, who are supporting, and I'm super excited. We're talking about how do we do small groups, how do we diagnose, do diagnostics for the kids so we can make sure we're getting them in the right groups and still keep them engaged and excited about learning in the summer. It's going to be phenomenal. So thanks for Eric for letting me piggyback on summer success. Strategies for improvement, this is pretty much the newest part. These are strategies that we talked about with our World's Best Workforce Subcommittee for Read Well by 3rd grade. So these are general, but know that there are underlying specifics that go along with these because I believe there are certain requirements for what we report in Read or World's Best Workforce. Like, for example, we can't include a very specific company or something like that. So we would like to continue working with our staff. It was disrupted with COVID. Continue working with our staff to help them understand dyslexia. How is the brain working? Why do some kids read differently? How do we identify that? And then how do we support those students who demonstrate those characteristics of dyslexia? We'd also like to do additional phonemic awareness and phonics instruction or professional development with our kindergarten and first grade teachers, starting there but not necessarily ending there. We recognize that this is a long-term process. There's been a shift in some of the teaching models when it comes to reading. I would like to do professional development with our reading staff or our elementary staff, classroom teachers, about the 4-part processing model as opposed to a previous model that we've been looking at, so that they have a better understanding of how the brain is processing information when our readers are learning to read and then moving up through the skills with reading. We plan to research and internally audit our Tier 3 intervention programs. You may recall that that was brought up a couple of years ago, and with every priority that comes up with the board, it's something that we really try to fit into a long-term plan, and so that's on our strategies this year. And then offer comprehensive reading intervention services for all identified K-2 learners. This is a very big and very important bullet point for me especially, and for those kids. Our kids going into 2nd grade had half a year of kindergarten. The teachers worked their tails off to make sure kids were getting materials and strategies when they're in the spring of their kindergarten year. But those were our youngest learners. And then they had this year, which, I've heard it's gone really, really well. In fact, our interventionists have said that they have seen some kids explode in growth, but then they have other students who have disappeared. So feasibly, some of our 2nd graders really could be needing additional support. And so I'll be working with classroom teachers over the summer to look at how we can restructure our curriculum maps and how we address reading instruction in our early reading classrooms to make sure that our K-2 kids especially are really getting those foundational skills that they may not have had exposure to because of COVID. And then also doing a reboot of our Tier 2 interventions, coming back around at it with teachers, retraining teachers, helping them to understand how important it is that they, that we're all in this journey together. All of us, intervention, special education, classroom teachers, paraprofessionals, principals, John Tyne, I'm gonna make you do interventions.
I love it.
And so that's where we are. I think that might be the very end of it. So those are the plans for going into next year. And now we roll up our sleeves, look at the budget, set up long-term plans, and decide how this is actually going to look in practice.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there questions? Director Riley.
Thanks, Karen. Could you touch on a little bit? I know the district aligns with, the Lucy Calkins curriculum, and since she had come out and basically said that it wasn't quite what she intended it to be, and needed supplemental help to get students where they need to be, how is the district, what is our approach with that?
Yeah, good question. So Lucy Calkins has built in, she's developed a phonics program. We didn't adopt that phonics program because we had already made a commitment before her program came out. And she's also moved to the 4-part processing model and has changed some of the language in her curriculum. And this is something that would be a part of doing professional development with our staff to help them understand that, in these parts of the curriculum, we're going to make a change. We're going to change that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. And I was glad you pulled one of the slides that had a specific question about the reading goal that was developed by the subcommittee.
Mm-hmm.
Was that something that the World's Best Workforce voted as a whole after the subcommittee came up with that recommendation?
I believe that it will be coming.
Yeah, I can answer that one. Great question, Director Weisberg. Our World's Best Workforce Report is going to be on the agenda at our next board meeting. And the advisory committee did work in small groups. And so it was the subcommittee, the Read Well by Third Grade subcommittee, that came up with that SMART goal. The larger group of the advisory committee did not come to consensus on all of the 5 specific areas of World's Best Workforce. So what you see in our Read Well by Third Grade plan is really the recommendation of that specific subcommittee that dug into the reading components.
Thank you. And I appreciate that the strategies for implementation is a lot more phonics forward. That's awesome. I was a little disappointed in how low that goal is, from 57 to 59. I mean, as a parent looking at that, I think our goal is an F. And if we're asking our kids, if that's our goal, is to get it not even up to a D level, how are we going to expect children to succeed as they go through the system? So that's one point I'd like to make, and I understand part of what you said, that the 57 was based on year 1 of a phonics program, so maybe the bar was just that low. I just wish the bar.
Yeah.
And you did say that you hope that it far exceeds. I just get very nervous about seeing a goal that low, especially how our scores have gone since 2015. The other question that I had was, it talked about future implementation of letters, but it didn't mention any specific date. Is that what you meant when you said you couldn't mention the company, but that's what you're talking about?
That would be a part of it. I believe that the Finance Committee will be discussing letters in an upcoming Finance Committee.
Correct. At our next, hopefully our next Finance and Ops Committee meeting.
I made a proposal to letters because there are a lot of complicating factors. One, we cannot force teachers to do professional development in the summer. We can ask them to and pay them, but because of the contract, we can't direct them to. And letters is a very time-intensive professional development. So I came up with an alternative plan that would be feasible for our interventionists and our EL teachers, our school psychs, that would, because they have the background knowledge, to be able to complete the program quickly while still being able to learn in depth, because they have that background knowledge. That's their area of study. I wouldn't do that with the classroom teachers because they don't, I mean, they have the background knowledge too, but it's not as in-depth as our interventionists. The company did not care for my plan. They felt it was too compressed. And so we're back to the drawing board about how we can figure out how to get the interventionists 60 hours of time. I believe it's 60 hours of time of their own to do the studying and the practicum, because we can't take them away from the kids. And so it's complicated, but we are working on it, trying to figure out the best way to make it happen.
Thank you.
Director Hackert?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lateral, for this presentation. It's been really interesting to kind of hear all the reading strategies and all the interventions that are currently in progress. I particularly am struck with your comment about needing to restructure our reading interventions and possibly looking into this next year and taking into account the struggles of this past year. And while some kids did great, others kind of fell off the map. So I really appreciate that is on your radar. I guess my question comes from more of a parent's perspective, looking at all these different kind of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. How do kids fall into those tiers, and what can people kind of from the outside, from a parent's perspective, expect to hear from the district? How can we support our readers? Is there tutoring opportunities within the schools? Are there things that we need to be doing at home? Kind of from the parent perspective, what can we expect?
So it's really complicated, and there's a lot of information, and I would be very happy to do a learning session on that. I mean, I can answer it now, but
I think just a basic tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, what does that actually mean?
Okay.
Tier 1 is that core instruction, everything that happens in the classroom. Tier 2 is that additional layer on top of what is also provided in the classroom by the teacher, in addition to working with the interventionist. So tier 3 is really when we get into that heightened level, and all of that is based on data. So these are data-informed decisions as to what would be the appropriate level of instruction and support for each child.
And can I
That's
just
exactly it.
add, within the school, we have professional learning communities, or PLCs, that meet as grade levels and cross-level groups. And then we also have data days, at least 4 times a year, and meet otherwise as needed. And we get together as teams, we look at the data, we look at the individual child, and a lot of parents don't realize the type of interventions that happen within the classroom with the teacher. Press is up there, and they can pull small groups within the classroom, not necessarily a pull-out with interventionists. And that is a powerful, powerful tool that I've seen work. So there's a lot going on with the different tiers.
Thank you.
Director Sherman?
Hi, I have just a couple questions, but I'll start with a broad one. You know, obviously, you're the literacy curriculum experts in the district. I want to know, in our role as a school board, what can we be doing? What do you need from us to better support and maximize your curriculum and your Read Well by Third Grade plan? I mean, what can we as a board, you know, is there something that we can be doing in our role to better support you that we might not be aware of today?
Thank you for asking that question. And this kind of goes back to a comment I wanted to make along with Director Hockert, or maybe Dr. Hockert, I don't know, your question. The idea of restructuring our intervention program, or looking at it and saying, what could we do better? What do we need? That costs money, frankly. Letters is incredibly expensive. There are things that we want to do, but we always need to do them within the scope of our budget. And I don't know if you recall, but our budget, our professional development and our curriculum budget and our assessment budget, frankly, which plays into reading, they were cut significantly a few years ago. And so we still need to respond to science curriculum and purchase science curriculum, and we still need to look at math and social studies coming down the pike. And those are incredibly expensive curricula to purchase. But we also need to have room within the budget to purchase materials if we're really going to look at, yes, let's restructure, or let's do an audit of our intervention program. That's going to cost money to buy materials and to do training. I have a plan. So I would say that would be the biggest thing. John, do you have extra money for me? Absolutely. Okay.
Director Riley?
Thanks. To that point, I know the board had set aside or directed letters spend at the time. It was at $89,000, I believe. I think we've only spent about $3. I believe you're the only person that's gotten the training. And, you know.
I did it for free.
Oh.
You didn't have to pay me. I just did it.
Beautiful. Thank you. But that being said, I mean, we had money in the budget to settle contracts, apparently $2 million over what initial parameters were. So I think it goes to apparently what the importance is of those in the district, you know, goes in. We need to start putting, and this was why I voted against the contracts, was because it doesn't leave us any money for programming, which frustrates me. But that being set aside, for the public, can you speak to the difficulty of the letters PD versus other PD in the process? Because you say it's really hard to get that PD done. So how does it work compared to the other PD?
So letters professional development. Letters comes in 2 volumes. Each volume is 4 units. Each unit is about 15 hours of independent learning, both reading, online, and then practicum, where you work with students to apply the learning. In addition to those 15 hours per unit. So right now, right there, we're up to 60 hours for an individual with volume 1. And another, we haven't even talked about volume 2 yet, another 60 hours for volume 2. So in addition to that, Letters recommends that we do a professional development day for each unit. So that's 4 professional development days for each unit, where we're not only paying the teachers hourly to learn, you know, that 60 hours, we're giving them, you know, excusing them, bringing in subs or whatnot. We're also paying a professional developer from the company and paying the teachers those 32 additional hours for those 4 days. So really, what is that? I'm an English teacher here, reading person, not math. So we're 60, is that 92 hours? I don't know. Don't quote me on that, but 60 for the individual and 32. Yeah, 92 hours. Plus the, you know, the pay that a professional developer would cost. And I don't have that number in front of me, but they're not inexpensive. For something else, like for example, we have made a commitment to have all of our interventionists, our tier 3 interventionists, Orton Gillingham trained. And that's much less expensive. It's paying teachers, interventionists, a week of training. And then the cost of the class, which is about $1,200, I think. Some of our interventionists in the past have chosen to go on to do the practicum on their own. We haven't paid for that, but they've chosen to do that on their own, which is great. And then in the middle, I would say if we were to do something like Wilson curriculum, we would need to purchase the curriculum, and I would say that the professional development would be somewhere in between the 2 ends of the spectrum, between Letters and Orton Gillingham. Now, you need to realize they're all very different things, right? So Letters is very helpful. It's knowledge building mostly. There are areas for application, but it's not a curriculum.
Right.
So we would still need to purchase an appropriate curriculum to go along with it. But it, you know, it is very beneficial for knowledge building. I will tell you that. It was fascinating. I mean, really good.
Right. In my understanding of Letters is that it is PD, and it helps teachers to understand how to apply whatever curriculum they're using more appropriately for the children to comprehend. I guess for me, with all the other things, I don't know that you would necessarily have to continue with Orton Gillingham if everybody is doing Letters PD. So, I mean, our results aren't great, and you know me, let's get that gap closed. And the best
Perhaps
way.
we could look at our intervention results if we want to evaluate the quality of our interventions, rather than looking at the district results as a whole, because they're muddied then by kids who aren't getting that.
But are kids not, if you do Letters, isn't that for whole? Is that only going to end up, because as my understanding, it was going to be train the trainer eventually, and it was going to spread out to include everybody, so all children would be getting that training.
I think that is something that needs to be decided by the finance committee and the board as a whole. That is something that we proposed. But again, now multiply what we're talking about with interventionists, multiply that times, how many teachers do we have in elementary? 300? Multiply that times 300 classroom and special educators. It's going to be upward of $1 million, was it, when we first looked? Yeah. So, and that's not, again, I'm a coordinator. I operate on the coordinator contract. Thank you, by the way, for that. And the board is the one that makes the funding decisions about whether or not we take on that. And so I'm going to defer that to the finance committee about how they want to pursue that.
Okay, Director Sherman?
Just for background, for the new board members, Karen, can you explain to us a little bit of background on this curriculum? Because what I'm interested in as a community member, I was always kind of taken aback. And I think I like to put everything in context of renewing our upcoming operating levy and trying to go to our community so that they can understand what we could do if they offered some more support for our schools. Can you tell us a little bit about when the curriculum was adopted and if it's fully implemented yet? Because what I remember is due to budget cuts, and I think that professional development was cut by like 54%, correct me if I'm wrong. I think curriculum was close to a quarter cut of the budget. And so I'm just curious, is it fully implemented now? And how long did that take? And was that a direct effect from some budget cuts that took place?
If you know me well, you know that I struggle with pulling numbers out of my brain. That's why I'm a reading teacher. So no, well, yes, we're fully implemented during COVID. I can answer that.
Perfect.
18-19 was our first year of Letterland. And then the following year, we had half of a year, and then we didn't do spring screening. And then this year, our teachers worked to transfer that online. And so, you know, if we're looking at those early reading scores, I would say that our Tier 1 teachers are much more skilled at using Letterland, which is our phonics curriculum in the primary grades. But I would also like to bring in professional development this year to revisit professional development because we always have turnover or we have people moving grades. And it's always good to have a refresher because we always learn something new the second time we go at a concept or a third time or whatnot.
I think that answers, so I think my main question was just that we are fully implemented now.
We weren't able to fully train the teachers in grades 3 through 5 in writing. We had a summer institute where some teachers went, but some teachers wanted to do it during the school year. And then poof. Because we did it actually during COVID for grades 3 through 5 online this summer, that must have been last summer in between. But then we couldn't do face-to-face with the people who didn't go, so.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Director Pervini.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have 3 questions. Sorry, I'll try to be as brief as I can. The first one is, can you tell us what types of issues do you identify with the students that are within the bracket that Director Weisbach, because I agree with what she said. What kinds of students, what kinds of challenges do you have? I'm speaking as a parent now, not as a board member, but as a parent, because you are the expert in this field. The second one is it possible to increase, you talked about focusing on the intervention, not necessarily the scores. I agree with you there. Because I think for Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, where we have the interventionist actually come in, what is the role of us as parents? What is our role? I know some parents might not be able to because of certain limitations. But what else can we do outside of the interventionist, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3? What else can we do as parents to be able to support the process? Because our participation also goes a long way. And so my third question is, are you able to increase the gap? Because we can have basic, intermediate, and advanced. And I'm going with what Director Weisbach just said. Are we able to increase the 59% so we can have a grid that shows kids at a basic level and how they move along the grid to the intermediate as well as the advanced? I think if we have that, then there's an expectation from both the interventionist and the other sources, like us parents on the outside, and you'll be able to measure where the difference is and how the movements have occurred over time before they get to 3rd grade. Is that something that is possible? I'd really like for you to talk about what us as parents can support you with respect to our children's success and your success as well.
Okay, thank you. So your first question was about types of students or
The issues that you.
issues that we see arise. I would say that, I think I would like to prepare more to answer that particular question. I would like to speak to our interventionists to see what are the biggest obstacles that they're facing related to that.
Is language one of the issues?
We do have English language learners who do receive intervention, but not all English language learners receive intervention. So it can play a role, but it's really a complicated issue that could be a number of factors. It could be poverty, it could be language poverty at home, not due to necessarily a second language being spoken, because that I see as an asset, honestly. But we do have students who sit in front of devices a lot and don't really participate in language. There's a whole host of.
Thank you.
I can just add to that. At the elementary level, it is absolutely critical that our youngest learners have those early reading skills and that they're read to. And there might be poverty or other barriers to that, but we do have early intervention that's open to all with our preschool programs, early childhood programs, and we need to get that communication out to give our children the best start possible. Because when they come to us at the elementary level without those early reading skills, we can get them to where they need to be, but it just takes a long time. We want to give them the best start possible.
Thank you for that, and thank you for talking about the language issue, and not necessarily sometimes it being an issue, because it's an asset in so many ways. You will be surprised that a lot of the kids who probably speak a second language can read in that second language.
Absolutely.
But I say this because it's important for us to be able to identify what those gaps are. Because if we're unable to identify those gaps, that's where the issue is. You're right, it could be socioeconomic, issues, poverty, screen time, even sometimes the parents not even being able to have the time to help the kids out, or even lack of education. So there could be all sorts of things. But I am a strong believer that nothing is impossible. I am a strong believer that regardless of where the kid is at, there is always a possibility if the intervention is a collective. It's total, let's put it that way. So there's the school, there's the parent, there's the community. I don't believe that, except maybe there are other issues that might be preventing the child from being able to read. But identifying those different things is important. Whether it's identifying the home space or identifying those challenges the child might be having in school, I think that's where us as parents come in. So if you can help us with that, I think we really appreciate that.
One thing that might be important to note is that we have teams of teachers and experts or specialists in the building who meet to discuss when they have students who are struggling and not making progress. And they look at, they talk to the interventionists, they talk specifically about, what skill deficit or what skill need is here, but what other factors are coming into play. So for example, as I mentioned, our interventionist said some kids were really successful. They showed up online every day and it was really successful for them, and other kids disappeared. And so when we meet to talk about students, we talk about all the potential factors that could be coming into play that might be having an impact on the child's learning. And I want to be 100% clear that I am in no way, shape, or form blaming families at all. It is something that we look at. We look at what are we doing, what can we do better? How can we support this child in the school, and what other factors might be playing a role that we could try to sort of start untangling. You mentioned the parents wanting more information. I did ask some interventionists to help me this summer to develop an intervention page for the district website and start making some videos where they could support with some of those early reading skills so that parents would know how to support their students. And then you mentioned about increasing the goal. I would be happy to discuss increasing the goal in the World's Best Workforce subgroup. My understanding is that a SMART goal needs to be achievable, and so a 2% gain is very often achievable. But again, we're sort of operating in the dark because that was the first year of implementation. And then we have 2 years of not quite sure if this is legitimate or not. So.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. And just, I feel like we're a little bit beaten. I'm scooting over to my microphone here, sorry. A dead horse. I just wanted to say that it's not just Director Riley and I that are continuing to bring up letters. This is a bill that's in the Senate and not to the House yet, and just as a portion of it says, the bill continues the bipartisan focus on early literacy by expanding the Successful Letters teacher training program. Letters has become the consensus approach to training educators on how to properly teach reading to young students, particularly students with dyslexia. Ohio, Mississippi, and Alabama are all currently using letters as part of successful efforts to improve reading outcomes. And a community member sent this to me today, that June 15th, there's a protest sponsored by National Parents Union Minnesota, Uplift Minnesota, Black Lives Matter Minnesota, Bright Beam, Justice for the Cities, Dyslexia Advocates, Minneapolis Advocacy Group, and Minneapolis Families and Students, a rally and protest. And the first bullet point says, Minneapolis public schools need a literacy plan, not a framework. And I just bring that up to say that this is gonna go beyond a couple of board members now saying this is important, based on what the former board said too, and a couple of parents coming up and speaking at open forum. This is getting to be a big deal. And I know other districts aren't waiting on the state to make this mandatory. They're finding a way to make it happen, so I hope we can find a way to make it happen sooner.
May I respond really quick?
Absolutely.
I am fully in support of letters. I have been fully in support of letters, but again, I'd like to point out that this is something that needs to operate within the scope of a long-term plan because it is incredibly expensive and it deals with employment contracts, and that is outside of my scope. So I just want to make sure everybody realizes that I am indeed in support of letters.
Thank you.
Thank you. Melinda?
I would just like to concur that we are in support of letters. It's a great program. We just need to put together the time and the finances for that, but it's very valuable. Before this report ends, I do want to also thank Karen Lateral for all of her work and her team's work, because as you can see by this report, this is a very complex, comprehensive, and challenging place to be, and literacy and reading, that is the gateway to, I believe, all the other subject areas for children in education, so.
Thank you. Director Onken.
Just more a comment, but maybe a question, maybe you know, if you've been involved with this, is are colleges looking at implementing this as part of curriculum for elementary age teachers? I mean, it would seem like if it is such a cost, it would seem like this should be a course requirement, you know, if it becomes legislated.
There is a movement and there is legislation to move post-secondary in that direction.
Okay, good.
Can I respond to that?
Director Riley.
I went to a C meeting and they had discussion on that from the University of Minnesota, and that was the topic, is that teachers coming out of graduation do not have this built into their regular coursework, and they were talking about adding it on top of it, and by the time all these teachers are finished now, because of the additional, most of these teachers will end up coming out of there with their masters.
Director Sherman.
Do we have a full-time interventionist at every school, or is there a way that that's set up? Just because you had mentioned, you know, auditing or maybe reassessing the way the intervention program is working. Do we currently have like one, or do some schools have two, or how is that staffed?
It's staffed depending on the need of the school, and so we generally, COVID has disrupted everything, I'm going to be upfront with that. But in a normal operating time, we will look at what the need is in each individual building and use our intervention staffing, determine how we shift the FTE around that we do have to help support that need. We have 3 funding pots. One comes out of our general fund, one comes out of state funding, that we help to pay for, but they reimburse us for a portion of that. And then Title I is funding for our 4 title buildings, so not all buildings will receive Title I staffing. In general, our Title I staffing has been going toward math intervention to make sure that we have, that we're addressing those needs as well. We have at least a 1.0 at each building. Now, that doesn't mean a teacher is 1.0 because that's, complicated, but we have at least a 1.0 FTE at each building. We definitely could benefit from more.
Because I guess I'm just thinking, Karen, that, people are asking, how do we get that benchmark up? And I would imagine that more robust intervention staffing would help. I would bet that there's staffing and training and, it's all this vicious cycle, right? Of we're cutting PD, but we want to increase the proficiency rate. And so it's kind of just reevaluating and reassessing where we are.
I would agree. And knowing that we're going into a pretty heavy science cycle with science adoption coming up down the road, my access to PD money is going to decrease because the priorities will move on to the next. But it's an ongoing need. I mean, reading is the foundation. Reading and language are the foundation of what we do. Even in math, they are the foundation.
And then one other thing, in addition to the interventionist question, is instructional coaching. I know we've cut a position this year, so I think more schools are sharing instructional coaches. What role does an instructional coach play in this, and how will that impact schools? I'm concerned that reducing that instructional coach is going to impact our reading programs.
I would say that the instructional coaching model has been instrumental in implementing our curriculum. They will be instrumental in implementing any curriculum that we adopt. For example, they can go in and show teachers how to use the curriculum, how to teach the curriculum. They sit down and help teachers understand how to look at their data to determine what students need. And they go in and observe the teachers and give them feedback about how they can tweak their instructional practices. They support the teachers in so many ways with instruction and implementation that they're indispensable, and I'm a little concerned. I know that this probably isn't the place for me to voice my opinion, but I'm a little concerned about the decrease because I know our full-time coaches have had a more successful experience than our part-time coaches. Our part-time coaches work really, really, really hard, but I would say that our full-time coaches feel like that they're more effective for that reason because they're there all of the time. So I am concerned about the impact, but that's not my lane. So.
Thank you, Karen.
Yep.
Director Hockert. Sorry, one more quick question. I know we're trying to wrap things up. Earlier you had mentioned that there are strategies to help our ELL students, and that kind of made me think about our dual language program as well. Do we have intervention or are people involved in that? How does that work?
We do. We have Susie Moyegas at Lake Elmo who does intervention for our dual immersion program. And Susie and I have talked quite a bit this year. And we've also talked with the Lake Elmo school psychologist, Kristen Arndt, who has done a lot of research and a lot of work about how do we evaluate students to determine if they have a disability when they're in an immersion program. Do we evaluate in both languages? Do we evaluate in the target language, and so on and so forth? And so, yes, we do have an interventionist. She's fabulous. We just met Tuesday morning to talk about some planning for next year, some things that we could build upon for next year. So, yeah.
Great, good to know, thanks.
Okay, well, if we have no further questions, we'll move on to the next item. And Karen, thank you so much for that.
Thank
And
you.
for putting together that report. I did read through it. You know,
Absolutely.
Superintendent Lansfeld is right. It's very complicated and, you know, in-depth, and I really appreciate all the time and effort and work you put into it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Okay. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is contract reviews, and that would be Dr. Tyne.
This is brief. There are 5 contracts that meet the criteria that was established by the board. They're included in your packet, and I will stand for any questions that you have about any or all of them.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Tyne, we'll move on to the next one, and that's you too, I believe, and that is the OPEB levy.
I would like to, good evening, first of all of you. Just take a deep breath. The 2 items that are next, that would be C and D, really kind of intertwine a little bit, and I will start with the one and move on. I've included in your packet some information that I think would be helpful. I think these are 2 terms that each of you have heard or been exposed to in different levels or have different experience with. So I'd just like to review a little bit, and I will start with OPEB. OPEB is established to help pay for post-employee benefits. After employees retire, this money is set aside to make sure that their benefits are paid. And the reason that happened was to take them out of the contract so they wouldn't be a continuing drag on the general fund. A number of years ago, the district passed issued bonds for over $19 million to pay for these benefits. The state of Minnesota also gives you the authority as a board to levy each year for an amount, okay? So on the packet, on the screen right now and in your packet, it talks about the history not only of the post-employee benefits or OPEB, but it also talks a little bit about QComp, which is the pay for performance, okay? Now, I'm not trying to confuse you. It's just to keep you awake so I can, for you're ready for the budget work. But over the past few years, I've put together a list of the actions the district and the board have taken considering these 2 accounts. First of all, OPEB has been levied in December of 2018 for $722,000 odd, and in 2019 for $683,000 levied. In 2020, there was no levy for the OPEB. And I do have some material, some exhibits that address that. And that's what I was referring to when I said they might get a little mixed up and run together. So Carissa, if you could go to Exhibit A, please. And I'm not trying to jump you through too many hopes, but I highlighted them in green so you could see, first of all, since they came in the order, the alternative compensation. And the alternative compensation is established by the legislature, and there is a limit on the number of schools that can be in this program. We're one of the few that are in. There's a cap on it. And new schools are not being accepted right now, okay? The amount is $260 per student. 191 of it is in, 169 is in aid, and $91 is in levy. In the past, the district has always accepted the aid, but there has been, they haven't accepted the levy portion. Now, just to make it a little more confusing, the legislature sets up a pot of money for this fund, and what we found out is with the population change in students, there's not enough money to cover it. So there's something called proration that happens, and we receive less in the form of aid than we were really entitled to. We are allowed to make that up with levy. Now there's been a change in the student population, and the student population has gone down, so we look for the chance to get 100%, and that will be coming in the levy in December. What we're talking about today is looking ahead to that time and giving you an opportunity to take a bite of the apple so you know what you're going to be voting on or talking about next week, or in 2 weeks, I guess it is, right? Right. And according to the exhibit that was run in May of 19, we would be able to levy $785,000. That was not levied. The same year, we were able to take a look at the post-employee benefits, or OPEB. We were allowed to levy $673. That was requested and was levied. If you look at the next sheet, part of the Exhibit A, you will be able to see across the top how much was levied for alternative teacher pay for performance. And the amount was, the limitation was $785. The amount that was certified was, there wasn't any certified, so that was not put in place. In 2018, the annual post-employee option was listed as 0 for the 2017-2018 pay, but it was levied in the 20 pay 19 year for $722,000. Now, I'm not going to get into the adjustments because that would probably send you all over the ledge. So I'm going to just go to Exhibit B, and that talks about the year pay 20. And the pay 20, which is what happened in this past year, the amount for alternative teacher was $820,000. The amount for OPEB was $683. And on the last page, it shows what was levied. We did not levy for alternative teacher pay for performance, or QComp. We did levy for our annual post-employee benefits. Then Exhibit C is the one that was approved in December of this year. And I'm sorry to bore you with the history, but I think it's important for you to know that. And the alternative compensation was set at, the amount of the levy would be $826,000. The amount for the pay OPEB was not requested. There wasn't any money requested in December of this year. And if you take a look at the payout, the alternative pay for performance was not levied for by the board, and there was not any amount set aside for the annual pay for performance. Now, what does this all mean? A little overview would be Exhibit D. What does this cost if you levied for it? If you levied, which we're asking for approximately $800,000 for OPEB to keep the funds solvent, it would be about $23 a year. If you take a look and go to QComp and say, we'd like to levy the QComp, and that amount would be about $825,000. If it's similar to the last year, that would be about $24. Then the question would be, how does that affect the tax burden? And what does it do if you take in the lease levy that we have on Brookview? And that's on the final exhibit. And it would be an additional $63 on top of this, okay? Now, there's a couple of things that I want to mention. Who does this? What neighboring schools have OPEB and QComp? Forest Lake does not levy for OPEB, but it does levy for QComp. West St. Paul levies for OPEB and QComp. Roseville does not levy for OPEB, and the reason why is they started the program a number of years ago. All their folks have gone through the program. There's nobody left to collect the benefits, okay, because they started it earlier. And that was, so they do QComp. South Washington is 900,000 for OPEB, $1.8 million for QComp. North St. Paul, they do both. Burnsville just does QComp. I think they started early. Now, the two big schools, Minneapolis and St. Paul. St. Paul does not do QComp. They've decided not to go in the program, and even if they wanted to now, they won't be able to get in. Their levy for OPEB is $21.6 million per year. And for Minneapolis, they're in both for much smaller amounts. So this is just a review and of how the money is raised and what it affects. Now, one of the things that I will tell you, and I'm not trying to give you ideas on what to levy, if you levied this in September, or you said it was going to be part of the levy, you could still change your mind in December. And so, or you could lower the amount. You just can't increase the amount, okay? And if, and I'll just leave it at that. And I'll stand for any questions. I bet somebody has one. Yes.
Director Onken.
So with that QComp money, you know, we just had Karen talking about professional development stuff. Could those dollars be used for professional development?
Earlier, Karen said she wasn't a money person, but she was a language arts person. So I'm not a language arts person or a developer, so I'm going to turn to Dr. Cherry.
Yes, actually, QComp does fund job embedded professional development, and that is, the core of that is our instructional coaches that are the heart of providing that professional development. Another core component of QComp is our mentorship program, which is just essential in terms of mentoring our new teachers. And so those pieces, absolutely, the majority of the QComp budget as it stands at this point in time is funding professional development. We have a work session, a learning session for the board planned on the 24th, where we will share our QComp plan in detail and also provide some information about what we would do if we had additional monies, how we might spend that.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. Historically, the vast majority of the $1.4 million in QComp budget has been spent on teacher stipends and instructional coaches. If we levied for it, how would it be spent?
Thanks, Director Weisberg. Just as I just indicated, we're going to.
The fan is going.
Oh.
If you could just talk a
Yep.
little louder.
So on the 24th, we have a learning session, and at that time, we will be reviewing our QComp program and provide detail about the initiatives, what we do with our funds, how it also relates to professional development. And so if we had those additional dollars, we'll also provide some information about how we could potentially use those additional funds.
And then who would make that final decision? I mean, if we had a non-voter approved levy for that additional money, is that something that the board gets to decide, or who makes the decision how that money's spent?
We have a QComp board of directors that sets the budget for the year, and then also makes any advises any revisions to that program plan. And then we would have to submit that to the Department of Education for approval. We have an annual approval for any changes to our already approved plan.
Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Cherry, could you please clarify, you know, people may have the mistaken notion that we don't have any QComp funds. We do get some from the state, correct? And so we're just talking now about whether to supplement that with a local levy. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. So as Dr. Tyne had mentioned on the Exhibit A, B, and C, there are multiple items that are highlighted there. The basic aid items are the QComp dollars that we receive from the state. And so we receive approximately $1.4 million per year from the state, and that's how we fund our current QComp program. The additional local levy is what generally is the local dollars that also support that plan.
And that's the additional up to $800,000, a little over $800,000 that we could be using to fully support that program, which I believe we're the only district that has a QComp program that does not use the local levy dollars.
And I just want to add, this next year with instructional coaches, we are supplementing their positions. It's a 1 year only, and we are using some PD budget that was not able to be used during last year's COVID to cover that. So after this year, I would be very concerned if we are not levying for that, that we would need to possibly make some additional cuts with our instructional coaches. And our entire district leadership team has discussed this and would be in favor of that levy for QComp because we know how critical that job embedded PD is at this time for our teachers and our students.
Thank you. Director Sherman?
So it sounds like we're going to have a work session on the program itself, but I have a finance-related question. I know in the district, OPEB, the post-employee benefits, is often non-voter approved for non-voter approved levy, but QComp hasn't in the past. So from my standpoint, just even hearing what Karen said, how important instructional coaches are and how important having teachers trained in best teaching practices is that important. Is there a reason why, and I know we have the OPEB trust that is established to kind of pay for OPEB, if you were only going to pick one, John, from a financial standpoint, is there a reason why you wouldn't do QComp and then just draw down the trust that we have that's designed and was done to pay for OPEB? I mean, is there, like, do we have a reduced credit rating? Is there a reason why, I guess, you wouldn't want to do that? Consider that.
Good question. First of all, the plan is put in place, and Dr. Cherry talked about that already, and there are only a limited number of schools that are allowed to do it. The trust started out with $19 million, and right now, my estimate is I think we're under $6 million. In your packet, it says 6.8, but it is the previous year. Next time when we meet, I will bring you from object code 291, which means nothing probably to anybody here, but it will tell exactly how much you have spent as a district, or we have spent, excuse me. You didn't individually spend it, and it's over $1 million. So at that rate, it's going to eat that down very quickly. Once that's gone, the trust is gone, that whole thing is going to have to be paid directly out of the general fund. That's your liability. And the reason you pass the trust, and you know, every 2 years we have an evaluation of it, a study to make sure that we're going to be able to meet the needs, and that's how we decide whether we're going to levy or not. And this next year is the year that we're going to have to do it. And I'm thinking of an actuarial study. That's what I meant to say. So.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's helpful to know that it would come from the general fund. So thank you, John.
Yep.
And can I just, sorry, I just have a follow-up question on what you just said. So do our OPEB obligations continue into perpetuity because this is how we pay for?
No.
Okay.
Well, I'm guessing, I can't believe any contract wouldn't have a sunset. And what I mean by that, when you pick the $19 million out, it was assumed that people are going to retire. And anybody that starts new isn't guaranteed retirement benefits, okay? Those benefits have sunsetted over a period of time. And when I talked earlier about Roseville, a number of years ago, they started it, and now everybody has aged out of the program. I think I was the last one. So I know they're all gone. And that's going to happen here. Each year, that amount is going to be less and less as more people retire on the senior level. Now, next year, we've got a number of people who, or this past spring, a number of people who have retired, I believe. So that's going to have a kind of a jolt to that plan. depending on where they, when and how often, or when they retire. Some people retire at 60, some at 64, and Medicare starts at 65. And I think that's when people would jettison the program.
Okay, thank you. Any other, Director Hockert?
Thank you. Looking over your sheet here, in December of 2020, we did not levy for OPEB. And kind of taking off what I think you were just talking about earlier, what impact does that have in our general budget then? Was that money pulled from our general fund for the last year?
Well, it's going to be paid, but there'll be an amount taken from the trust, and then an amount that, depending on what the actuarial study will say too. They help guide how much we take out. And Lynn, I talked to Lynn about this, and she said, well, the auditors will come in and they'll make some adjustments, and depending on where it goes. My gut feeling is that the trust is going to go down and be in the area of $6 million. Now remember, I think in there it said that the year that we established the trust or sold the bonds, and so that's gone from 19 million on down to 6 million. And you've got people still retiring. Next time when we meet, I will have the annual cost. I will have some other information too about how many people have retired and how many people are still left in the queue. So we'll have an idea how many are out there. And I know any retired folks that are out there that have qualified for this program, it's in the contract. We're going to honor our contract. I'm sure you will. I know you will.
Okay, any other questions? Director Weisberg.
It's not a question, it's just more of a comment. I don't think that we have ever levied for QComp
No,
prior.
never.
Right, so it just makes me nervous throwing another non-voter approved into the mix. Since we already did Brookview, now we're talking about less, to me, financial transparency and going into a levy. So that's my comment.
Okay, anyone else? Director Sherman.
I actually met with some people in the district regarding QComp because I wanted to kind of understand more. And so I'm grateful that we're going to have a work session on this topic, because I think that when we look at the comparables and who we compare ourselves to as districts, what probably was the most stunning thing for me was that we are the only metro district that does not levy for QComp. And so I guess I respect what Director Weisberg has to say, and I definitely want to look at how we would use those funds. But just as I'm kind of doing the math, QComp is, about $2 a month. And based on what the read well by third grade, some of the instructional coaches that we can support, they're critical to that early literacy piece that is so important, such an important foundation for our students. So I think for me, I look at that, I added up, and I'm glad you included Brookview on the list, John. I added up, if we did as a board, OPEB, Brookview, and QComp, you're talking $5.25 a month. Which still does set us way below the comparable average that we benchmark ourselves against. And I know I want to understand more about the program, but I think it is a little bit of a concern to me when we're taking the money in the form of the state aid. And my understanding of QComp was that it was always designed to be kind of the shared partnership between the local levy and the state aid. And we haven't done that. So again, I'm looking forward to hearing the information, but I just look at it as a critical piece that can definitely benefit student achievement. So I appreciate the information.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, as was noted, we are going to have a work session to talk about QComp, and then at our next meeting, we will bring these forward as action items. And we do need to make our intentions known to taxpayers before the end of June. But as Dr. Tyne had mentioned earlier, we just need to sort of create space for it. If that is what if we're going to do a levy, we can change our minds later to not levy, in December. But we need to create the opportunity for it. So we will do that then at our next meeting. Before we get into the budget, I'd like to take a short break. And so it is now 8:15. Can we be back here at 8:20? Thank you.
empty nester soon. Okay, you. I have a young 11-year-old.
Yeah, that third.
He'll be my money maker.
Oh, my goodness.
There we go. I think he's going to excel in sports.
Yeah.
Okay, we are back, and the next item on our agenda is the preliminary budget, and we'll go to Dr. Tyne for that.
Good, thank you. Board Chair, Superintendent, Board of Directors. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. And I think earlier Karen mentioned that a couple of times she said, wow, what a year, you know? And this has really been probably the most interesting situation I've ever been placed in. Trying to put together a budget with as many unknowns. And in fact, today, a little editorial I was driving in, and it talked about the legislature meeting and still disagreeing on how they were going to fund K-12 education. And that does have a big effect on what we're talking about today. So I didn't put together, the team put together a budget, and I want to give, of course, give credit to all the people who worked on it, including the principals, administrators, everybody else contributed. This is just, I'm a compiler, so the good work that's in here is due to them. There's one thing I highlighted on that first page, and I brought it to you. It was uncontrollable variables, and there have been a lot of them this year. I'm going to review just a little, and I put together a separate packet so you wouldn't have to page through and try to find where I'm at, because I'm going to skip a little bit, and I thought it would be easier for the many people watching at home. So there's a brief introduction that talks about the district a little bit, and there's a budget timeline. And I think you may recall that earlier this year, I came to the board, or I addressed the board on the budget timeline, and I also talked to them about budget assumptions, what we were going to use to build the budget on, kind of the framework that we were going to build it around. One of the unknowns that really kind of surprised all of us and is keeping a lot of people awake, not just in this district, but across the state of Minnesota, is the enrollment trends and projections. We're projecting that the enrollment is going to go up, thanks to Mark has provided information. But if you take a look at the 2019 compared to the 2020, there is a definite reduction in the number of students that we're serving. And when the student population decreases, so does the revenue. It does show up in the revenue. So it talks a little bit about employee contracts, general education revenue, school allocations, and then the page that probably is kind of a highlight, it talks about how the budget is spread out, and that's the graph, Carissa, if you could go back one. And always when we put a budget in here, we put a red herring in here. There's a couple mistakes in here just to see if you're paying attention. So if you catch them, okay? All right. All right. So the primary budget is split, and the majority of our revenue does come from state aids and credits. The second largest portion comes from property taxes, or our local taxpayers. And then the rest comes 6% from federal, and then the rest it comes from other. And probably people say, well, what other could there be besides those? And you'll notice this has all funds. And a little later, we're going to talk about the community education fund. And community education is almost totally driven, not totally, but a lot of their revenue comes from fees and services. And even at the high school, there's a large number of fees that are offered in the general fund too. If you take a look at the expenditures, 73% of all of our salaries, or the salaries and benefits make up 73% of the general fund. When you take all funds, it comes to about 46%, 21% comes from benefits, and then it goes down the line and breaks them all out for you. I'd like you to turn to the next page that's up on, and it's the general fund. And you'll notice that the general fund not only includes the buses run and the teachers are paid, but it also includes your capital outlay expenditures and your long-term facility maintenance, which is a large portion of it. And then I think, Gabe, they also put some severance in there. But you'll notice that the beginning balance in 1920 was about 21 million. And then this year, the primary budget beginning balance, it looks like it's going to be 27,600,000. That's a reduction from last year. And revenues have shown an increase. We look for an increase in revenue, and these are preliminary budgets. And then also revenues plus expenditures, it shows that there's going to be a decrease. Ending fund balance is going to go down. And the details are there for you to look at. I included another little document that I've presented before to you, and I just wanted you to know that the beginning fund balance was about 10,600,000. We're estimating the revenue at about 112,250,000, less the capital outlay and the MFT. That adjusts the revenue down to about 105. Estimated expenditures are going to be about 120, and that's a pretty big number. And the reason that is a big number over the benefit is the settlement is the big thing, and also COVID spending. There are some COVID expenditures in there too. And the majority of those are in the area of technology. And then it shows the less of the capital outlay, et cetera. So adjusted expenditures about 110 million, and we look for about $5,700,000 in fund balance, which puts us right at that cusp of 5%. And though I think over the last few months I've presented at Finance and Operations, and I've showed you where the expenditures have been compared to one year to the next, so you could take a look at them and get an idea. And you'll notice that the expenditures in the area of salaries and comp have shown increase. Big increase in the area of technology expenditures. And those are pretty easy to see. And I will bring those again next time, the most current ones, to give you some kind of idea where we're at. I took the expenditures that we've spent the last month of the year, last year, took that and increased it by the percentage that we've increased spending this year. And it gives us kind of a picture of where we're at. Now, this is more of it's kind of a science that you do. And remember now, I just want to say this, that this budget that you're finishing up was a budget that was put together in the fall of 19, okay? So there are some interesting, not 19, in the fall, because Kristen put it together. And I think it was a marvelous job. Now, I'd like to take credit, but I can't. On the next page, please, the next one over, Chris, thank you. It shows the estimated revenues about 116 million. That's an estimate on our part. And the reason for that is because of the increase in COVID. And I've presented to you previously on COVID, and I would like to do that again one more time. And I'd like to make it known that we're going to present it so that the public can take a look at it, and the public can have a bite of the apple if they want to. If they see something or have suggestions for you, that the way they would like to see those COVID dollars spent and used, we would like to hear from them, and we'd like to know. Expenditures are about 106 million. And then the estimated, or revenue is 106 million adjusted. Expenditures about 117, less the deductions about 106, and we're at about 5.4 on the fund balance. Now, those will fluctuate a little bit. Yeah.
So,
yes.
For revenues and stuff, this wouldn't take into account any increase by the state, correct?
No, there's no, I tell you what I did not do. I didn't want to dig a hole negotiation-wise. I think it's not important. I did not put money in there for negotiations to start with. And the reason that I didn't was because all of a sudden this is a public document that people look at.
Right.
I did not put in the revenue from the state of Minnesota either.
Right.
So those are two things that need to be entered in. And I don't want to tie the negotiators' hands, and I don't want to end up in a situation where if we don't settle, that the budget is kind of misleading, and then we're out and we're stuck in a box. So that's the reason for it. Now, this is a work in progress, so I think we need to be coming back to this, and we will periodically. And that would be, of course, my recommendation to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then the estimated revenue of 116 million, that's based on how many students projected?
That's on the revenue, that's on the students that's put here. I think it's 82. I had it on the page. It's about 8210.
Okay.
And that's down from the 2019 8380. And this year it was estimated at being at 8102. Now, I want to just mention a little something about students too. First of all, people say, well, what's so hard about counting students? You just go into a classroom and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the end of the day. We know how many we have. But you have to remember, in this society, it's a large amount of mobility. People come, kids go. We're paying tuition for kids that probably have never set foot in this district because of legal reasons. And so the student counts are going to be adjusted. And the student count, we probably don't have the final one on the last year yet. And we won't probably for a little bit longer, because those are entered on the Mars report. And when there's you only get so many days, and when they bump together, then they have to figure out where the student, really resided for what period of time.
It's your average daily membership.
Got it? Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next page, and it's up at the top. It's community service, and I would like to talk about that. It's one back, please. And I've had it, that's the page on the right side of the screen. And the reason I brought that up is I've had a chance to talk with Annette. And Annette presented at the Finance and Ops meeting. And she stopped in my office the other day and she said, this is a moving target. I don't know where it's at, and I'm getting a little nervous. And when she gets nervous, I get very nervous. And so she thinks it might be a little bit better. And I said, rather than mislead the board, what I was going to use is the budget numbers that we have, and we're going to update you when we get better details. Now, we can make adjustments on into July. Probably we could on the budget, because the last payroll will go out on July 15th, okay, for the previous year. All right. So Annette is also going to find out what needs to be moved forward in the way of fees and what needs to be moved back. So rather than mislead you, she is concerned about this. I am concerned about it. We think it's going to be better than we anticipated, but we want to make sure before we do that. So Annette couldn't be here tonight. She sends her regards, and she'll probably be here next time, and you'll have similar information. But we'll be coming back to you with that and going to the Finance and Op meeting with that also. And then on the next page, please, Clarissa, I included the OPEB trust, and you'll notice that's June 30th, 2020. It was 6.9 million approximately, and I think I know that's quite a bit less. And I will bring the amount next time, or a very good estimate on it. And then I also want to talk about the internal service funds, which is for dental and health insurance. And the balance is $55,200,000. And we did not raise rates this year, so there's no increase in the district's contribution or for the increase in the amount we're going to have to pay for health insurance or dental insurance, which makes a difference. Now, if you go to the next side of that sheet, there you are. It gives the projected fund balance, shows where we're at. And the general fund, remember, that's all the general fund numbers, capital outlay and long-term facility. Food service is remarkable. They're very healthy. And if you remember the presentation I made on COVID, we have supplemented food service. We've also used some funds to supplement community ed, which makes a little bit of a difference too. And we've used a large portion of it for technology. And then the funds are listed, and the last 2 pages, these are the ones that are really kind of important. It gives you a breakdown. I'm gonna put my glasses on because the print is small. Where the revenue comes from. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure the numbers do match up, and if you see anything that's out of the way, I surely want you to mention it. But they're listed, and again, I'd highlight the community service on the revenue and the expenditures, because that's a moving target, and rather than mislead the public or you, we're gonna wait for better information. So, I would be happy to stand for any questions, knowing you're going to get another bite of the apple before you have to approve this. And you do need to approve a budget by June 30th, so that we can continue operating as a district.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tyne.
Well, thank you.
Questions?
You want to find the red herring?
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh.
Yes, Director Pervani.
Very simple. So this is a pretty conservative budget, right?
Yes.
But there's a possibility that it might look better than this.
Could be.
Possibilities,
But,
okay,
you know,
okay.
you always, you know, I'm a belt and suspenders guy.
No, it's fair, it's fair.
One of the things that I want to tell you, the red herring that we missed in here is on the front page. And we forgot somebody's name. It wasn't intentional, but Carissa's name needs to be on there. And we will correct that. And if you find anything else, yeah, we planned it that way. Okay.
So I did notice that as you were projecting what the fund balance might be at the end of this next year, it comes in a little less than 5%. Are you concerned about that?
No, because I think it's in the kind of the margin of error of my error, you know, because putting together this, it's a guess and a by golly too. So that's one of the reasons I didn't, and you know, there could be additional COVID money, and I don't want to drag that up, but we're going to be going in and requesting the summer school money right now. And if you listen to the paper, they said you could spend it this year, or you could carry it over to the next year. In fact, we're meeting with Rachel tomorrow morning at 5:30 in the morning, isn't it, Rachel? No, it's 8 o'clock. And we're going to try to upload the application, and the application probably will stress summer school partnerships with like our community partners. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then Dr. Cherry has put together information for the SR2 funding, which is about $875,000. And that amount, we're going to sit down, and she's put together a application. We've applied for the funds. Now we have to put the application in. And once we get that in, then we have time to move it around and change it. But we just need to get that done. And that's by June 30th. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we will be seeing you at the next meeting.
Yes, you will. Good Lord
This will be an
willing.
action item at our next meeting. Thank you, Dr. Tyne.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is the long-term facility maintenance fiscal year 2023 report, and that is Director Drummerhausen.
Good evening again, Chair Petrie, members of the board. The purpose of this report is to provide a comprehensive list of projects that qualify for long-term facility maintenance funding. The items listed will be prioritized to create information needed to complete the required long-term facility maintenance application. The long-term facility maintenance application must include a long-term facility maintenance revenue application, the 10-year expenditure, long-term facility maintenance revenue projection, statement of insurances, and school board resolution/meeting minutes adopting the LTFM 10-year plan. To qualify for the 2022 payable property tax levy, The 2023 10-year plan must be adopted and submitted to the Board of Education. So with that being said, in your packet is a proposed list of projects for fiscal year 2023. So the fiscal year 2023 is a year ahead of when the projects are. So this list will be, in theory, for next summer's projects. So kind of the process we use to come up with this list is starts in January, where Tony Wilger, who does an outstanding job with our long-term facility maintenance and our buildings and grounds, he and I get together and kind of look at building needs at each building and all of our facilities, look at roofs, look at boilers, parking lots, interior doors, exterior doors, et cetera, and kind of where we are from a lifespan on some of those things and what's coming up in the next cycle. Then we compile the list for each of the buildings. Then in early spring, February, March, we have meetings. Tony and I meet with each building principal and head engineer to go over our list of upcoming things that we have that need to be replaced or need to be talked about. They also bring a list forward and say from their perspective, can we look at this or can we look at that or whatever. So then we come together, take those lists and try to prioritize those things for each individual school. Then after we have those individual school meetings, we come together and say, okay, taking all the projects that we discussed, we try to bring it down, and these are all estimates of the pricing that you see listed there. So take those estimates and try to hit around that $7 million marker. It's kind of been our target the last couple of years in terms of a long-term facility budget. So this is our first draft. We are open to any changes or modifications that the board may wish, but this is kind of our first draft, taking in all that information, presenting it to you here tonight, and then looking for approval from the board in June. And then all of this is due to MDE by July 31st. But it has to be not only approved by the board, but the meeting minutes of the board need to be approved as well. So the June 25th meeting, if it's approved there, then at the next board meeting, once those meeting minutes are approved, must be approved before July 31st submission. So that's kind of why we're here tonight. So I can go line by line, school by school, or if you just have some general comments or just kind of with that, I'll open it up to any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you, Director Drummerhausen. Are there any questions or comments?
Katie.
Behind you, Director Hawkins. Thanks. Director Drummerhausen, I'm just kind of curious, are these all things that were already in that long-term facilities maintenance plan that's been in the works for a while, or are any of these addressing like what the CDT had suggested? How does that kind of factor in?
Yes and yes. So these are all part of kind of the 10-year plan, kind of rolling up the next year and kind of looking at what's coming up or coming down the line. In addition to that, the kind of one of the buildings that's getting more of the remodel is Stonebridge. And so being part of the CDT recommendation of looking at the classrooms on each side of the media center. So currently this summer, we started on Monday of looking at remodeling the northern classroom, the classes to the north of the media center. This here would address the classrooms to the south side of the media center in Stonebridge. So that was one of the long-term facility maintenance projects that we're addressing through the CDT. Other projects are just annual repairs or repairs that just need to happen at each of the schools.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? I just a sort of a silly little question, but I was struck by the fact that we're replacing chalkboards because I wasn't even aware that we were still using chalkboards, but.
Yep. There are classrooms that have that. So when we go in and do a classroom remodel, that's part of it too, is updating casework, flooring, chalkboards, those sorts of things. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you at the next meeting then for a vote on this. Okay, the next item on the agenda is Withrow School and Kern Properties Report. That's you who is going to take that?
It's going to be shared between myself and Director Drummer.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so Chair Petrie and Board Directors, this is a report, as you stated, on the Withrow property and the Kern property. We are proposing a sale of the properties. Right now, we are looking at our community design team recommendations with the rebuilding of Lake Elmo as 2 schools. That was the recommendation. We are looking at a future bond during the 2022 school year, either in August or November of that year. Expanding Brookview is also a top priority of the CDT committee. We have a lease levy approved for the addition of 8 classrooms, and utilizing Oak Park as a multi-purpose center to house the St. Croix Valley Area Learning Center, or ALC, the Bridge Transitions 18 through 21 program, and Central Services staff. We are studying options for this space. At this time, for the past 4 years, the Transitions 18 through 21 year old program has been in the building. Also, as Director Drummerhausen just mentioned, remodeling of Stonebridge Elementary. Some of that work is being completed with our long-term facility maintenance funding. Selling Withrow Elementary, appraisal was obtained, and we're bringing some information tonight with a proposal for request for quotes. And selling Central Services Building, we will be doing a more in-depth study on options for that space. Okay, so just to mention before we jump into this slide, the CDT, again, that was that list was the highest priorities. There are other priorities on that list, but that's where we're starting. Okay, Withrow Elementary building and the property, it was built in 1954. And it's currently vacant. It's houses about 150 students and then staff, and it is in the northwest part of Stillwater in Hugo, and the building is mainly filled with traditional classrooms. Okay. Since it is closed, we do have some yearly maintenance fees on that, and some ongoing costs, and it varies from year to year. Okay. Okay, and this is a map of Hugo, and I'm going to let, or the city of Hugo, and I'm going to let Director Drummerhausen explain this just a little bit.
So this is an image from the 2040 Hugo comp plan, and this is kind of the land use. So as you look at this area, if you look at the right side of the map on top, the lighter green color is agriculture. Right below that, on the right side, the darker color is large lot residential, which is kind of 1 lot per acre. As you look to the left side of the map, that's have different colors, the yellow, the red, and those sorts of things is some higher density of housing in some commercial areas. The district property, where the district boundary is, it's basically the bottom right-hand corner. So Sunset Lake is kind of right on the bottom, that bigger lake there, east of Sunset Lake, and you kind of basically go to the top of the green, east of Sunset Lake, go to the top of the green, and then over to the right. So that kind of bottom right-hand corner is Stillwater School District property in the city of Hugo.
Okay, if you look at, and I know this map is hard to see, but from a distance, you can look at our student distribution with all of those colored dots, and all of the colored areas are different communities. And we have some tiny blue triangles within all of those dots. Those are elementary schools, and they are placed, all of the schools are placed within the higher student population areas. With the exception of Lake Elmo, it's in a dense area, but it could be further south where more of Lake Elmo's student population is. And then the pale yellow section of the map, the Withrow building is right up there, kind of in the eye of that pale yellow where the cursor is right now. And so you can see that there's not a lot of dense student population in that area. If you look at this chart, this is our projected enrollment for the 2022-23 school year. It lists all of our elementary schools. And if you look over on the far right, that shows projected open seats or lack of seats. The middle column is the programmatic capacity of the schools. Afton Lakeland, you can see, is projected to be needing 26 seats, and this is before we do any possible boundary changes. Brookview is showing 101. That would be with the addition of the 8 classrooms opening that fall of 2022. Lake Elmo, that is kind of our point where we are just overpopulated, and that is projected to be 233 seats that we need that is not available. And you go on down, if you look at Rutherford and Stonebridge, those are the 2 elementary schools that are closest to the Withrow area. They do have 161 and 144 student open seats projected. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Okay. So I will turn over the next few slides to Director Drummerhausen.
The second property is, here at school, we refer it as the current site. So it's across the street from the high school. As you look at the map here on the right is Century Power. The little triangle space there is the area that our school district owns. It's 3.72 acres. It was donated to us about 8 years ago. As a district, we've looked at it a few times for different things. We looked at it before we built the early childhood building, but there are 2 power poles with power lines across of it, so we didn't obviously want to build a school with power lines above that. We also looked at it for a bus garage, but that area isn't big enough, and we also looked to the adjacent land there to the south in acquiring that into, but that just did not work out. So we've had that for a few years. We have had a couple interested parties in being interested in buying that property from us. So we did have an appraisal done and completed here within the last month. And so we are adding that to the request for quotes here presentation tonight. So with that, I believe.
Okay, so next steps, district administration is recommending placing the Withrow School property and the current property on the market. The board will be asked to approve a request for quotes to identify a realtor to list the properties. Should an offer be made, the board will meet to identify parameters for sale price and negotiate a sale. And with that, we are open for questions.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. I know we had heard in the past that the annual expenses to keep Withrow maintained were about $85,000, but could you refresh my memory? I thought I had taken a picture of it, what the actual expenses are?
Yeah, say it was estimated from 40,000 to 75,000. Previously, the maintenance costs so far have ranged from 26,000 to 43,000, and it varies from year to year depending on things like snow removal. Year to date, at this time for this year, it's about at 17,000. It could be greater than that. Some years you might need a roof replaced in this building or some other items that might be taken care of. There are also some soft costs, which I call soft costs, that are not accounted for in our fees, such as the buildings, grounds, maintenance, things like that.
Thank you.
Director Riley.
Thank you. Can we go back to the student distribution slide with current attendance boundaries? Are those students enrolled into the district currently, or are those all the students that reside within our boundaries?
Are you talking about, Krista, can you go up one
No,
slide?
the big
Talking
map.
about the map here?
Yep.
So that's map as of October 1st, just elementary only, students enrolled in our school district.
Enrolled, but
correct?
not potential.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Director Sherman.
I just thought it might be helpful for the community to know that this is the second time the board has seen this information because there was a closed session on it. So I just thought it might be helpful background information and good information regarding the facility for the community to understand the costs and the demographics and the community design team recommendations and some of the student density. So I appreciate you sharing this again with us.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. It's actually, we saw it before, in 2019 as well, and at that time, the recommendation was to give the building away. We were not aware that there was actually an appraisal done in 2016 that valued it at what, I believe, was 3 million, is that correct? At that time. So the advice at that time was to donate the building, and now we're talking about selling an asset, while Hugo is actually a growing area. I believe White Bear, I don't know if it's I think it's White Bear Lake is actually building a new elementary school in Hugo. So to me, giving this up, I know that this map shows only students that are currently enrolled in our district, but it doesn't show potential students, and it doesn't show students who opted for a charter school that's now in the north. So to me, this is a horrible mistake, and I know that a lot of people like to think that the CDT was actually something that the whole community rallies behind. I personally don't think that's true. And I believe getting rid of an asset and then thinking, okay, well, if we all of a sudden have growth out there, let's build a new school, is a huge mistake. That's a free and clear building that we have now is there for hopefully when we will need it, if we can actually do something to grow our enrollment, which I hope we can do. But giving up that asset to me makes absolutely no sense, and thinking, okay, down the road, we're just gonna ask the taxpayers for another $35 million to build a new building. To me, that's financially irresponsible, and I'm 100% not behind putting this property on the market.
Director Porbeni.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. We have an empty building. How much do we spend a month to maintain this building? About 45 or?
Chris, you just had that slide up.
How much is it?
Can you pull that up again?
Okay.
And that right there's has been the annual cost to maintain.
Okay, so about, let's say 21, $17,000, right? Am I correct? And we were here talking about a $10 book. We're concerned about fiscal responsibility when it comes to a $10 book. $17,160 for an empty building that takes about 150 students, and we have all sorts of spaces in our other schools. So we're going to keep a building that is not only a building that we can't even use, but continue to spend money to maintain this building. It's of no use to us right now. We're talking about fiscal responsibility. That money can go to helping our students. Do we keep a building or we help our children? That's the question. Do we use that money to help our students, or we keep maintaining something that is empty that we probably might never use? And here we were talking about a $10 book.
Director Hockert.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's what I was looking for. So roughly, we've already spent $135,000 on an empty building over the last several years in order to keep it open. And that's not including, I didn't get to add up the projected long-term facility maintenance numbers as well, which we are still responsible for that property if we still own it. And this is a property that is big enough for 150 students. And unfortunately, as we saw in the map, it's not located in the right spot where we have 150 students to fill it with. We would need to fill it with a whole lot more if we need to keep this facility as a school. And it would also mean busing kids from a lot farther away in order to fill that facility. So I disagree with Dr. Weisberg's comments that this is a short-sighted investment. I see quite the opposite, that this is a much better use of our financial authority as a board in selling an asset in times where we have strapped budgets coming out of COVID and uncertainty in the next couple of years. I don't see keeping it around without a proper use for this facility and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on this, tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars on this facility. So I do support moving forward with the sale of Withrow.
Director Sherman.
I think probably the community can guess we see this very differently on the board, and sometimes that's just going to happen. I just don't see you know, we have students across our district that are choosing other options, north to south, including charters and a varying options. It's not just something that's concentrated in the north, it's also in the south. So that's a totally separate issue that we do need to address. This is a very small building. This would not be free to operate. The students, according to the latest demographics with Hazel Reinhardt, we just don't have projected growth in this area in our district. And White Bear Lake may have growth around the, you know, following the sewer and the water and out by Highway 61. And they're certainly building their own building to address growth in their district. And I think that we also need to really evaluate where our growth is happening, be grateful for that growth, and start really serving the kids that are in our district and currently don't have space. And we have space in our northern schools. We're going to be, shifting some boundaries and moving some kids around to be fiscally responsible, and this is part of that. This building would not be free to operate, and the growth does not demand that it is there. And we're simply going to put it on the market and see what happens. We're not voting at this point to sell it, but it certainly does fall in line with what the community design team recommended, which is important to me to listen to the community in that regard as well. So I appreciate the information. For me, that is how I will be making this decision, is based on that demographic and cost information and the projected growth and where it's occurring in our district.
Director Riley.
I think everybody appreciates the growth. I don't think anybody in here is saying they don't appreciate the growth. Part of the problem as I look at this student distribution map is that it's pretty much a slap in the face to the northern part of the community. You have discounted potential students participating and inviting them back into our district, even as an option of utilizing this school to be an attractant to the community, to add something that isn't common in this area, to encourage student growth and more families to bump back into our district. I would love to see those numbers bigger, but the fact that these students aren't even on here as potentials pretty much says they're disregarded, they're not wanted. As far as the CDT, that is a wish list. Lots of things in there that can happen that totally depend on the voter. The attrition rate of that CDT was about 70%. So what we started out with and what we ended up with, it had a huge attrition rate, which does not speak very well of the process of that group. This, to me, this timing of now all of a sudden selling Withrow, wanting to sell Withrow, when you are coming up against a levy and a bond and claiming we need space, is kind of a false dichotomy. Get rid of it, right? Get rid of it so then we don't have that space to consider. I think you're upsetting the community you need. I'm really disappointed this board didn't poll the community to see what and if they would even support curriculum. I asked, I was denied by you all. So to me, that is really disappointing, and it really shows who matters and who doesn't in this district.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. I'm glad you made that point, Director Riley. And Director Probeni, when you said, it's just sitting here, that's a choice this board made. And just like Director Riley just said, we could have asked the community, are you interested in a magnet school that students could go there? But we didn't even give them the opportunity to do that. And to me, that could have grown our enrollment, which would have helped our numbers. But we didn't even go there. When the school was operating, it was full, and it was in the green.
Yep.
And it could be there again. And the fact that we're here talking about it, to me, almost just sounds a little spiteful. And with a levy and a bond to pass, I don't think it's smart.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Is this going to come before the board for a vote before you decide to go out for an RFP? What is the process here?
This would be going out for a request for quotes, just for a real estate agent to explore the sale of the properties.
Okay, so, and that could
Need a-
happen,
Yeah, we don't need a board vote.
don't need a
for
board vote
request
for that.
quotes.
But you're looking for what the sense of the board is tonight on this, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Director Porbeni.
Thank you. You know, I really appreciate the fact that, you know, the way both of you advocate for Wheatrow. If you had put the same effort for Brookview or Lake Elmo, I'm sure those children would have gotten the classrooms that they so much deserve. That is a space where the population is growing, but you always advocated for no extension for Brookview. If you put the same effort as you do now for an empty school where you had how many students in the class? 14, 15?
Wrong.
Let me finish.
That's wrong.
14, 15, that costs the district more, and you claim that that's a full, the school was full.
Yes, it was.
But if you did the same, you always said no to the expansion of Brookview, knowing fully well that the population there was going beyond what was needed. You've never supported Lake Elmo. Yeah. And now we sit here talking about an empty school, advocating strongly for an empty school. You always talk about the bond and the levy. There's a lot of us that pay taxes in this district that will vote for the levy because it is not us right here that will suffer. It's our children that will suffer. And if you think that because of one empty school that we spend money, that nothing happens, if you think you're going to punish our kids because of that, you can go ahead and do it. But I think the majority of our community know what's best for our children. Just so I'm clear, I am the only one on this board that was in the CDT. You continue to dismiss the CDT and say things that are untrue about the CDT. You continue to say that. I was there as a member of the CDT. So saying that that was not a structured or participatory process from the community is a lie.
No.
Is a lie. Nobody knew me from Adam, but I was there. So please be careful when you make those kinds of statements, because you just made a statement that was extremely dismissive and disrespectful about the members of the CDT. Those are members of our community. Those are parents. Those are teachers. Those are people who pay taxes in this community. So we need to be really careful when we say things about the people who made it possible for us to have what we're having today. Please, if you can, advocate for other children that are not in your part of the world. Then we know that we're having a fair game here.
Director Sherman.
This comes up from time to time that the board didn't ask an open-ended question. And I had actually went back and looked at the Baker-Tilly survey. And I want people in the community to know we did ask an open-ended question. We asked what kind of programs would people in the district want to see? The most popular answer was no new programs. Then it was practical education, foreign language, traditional, COVID help. I mean, you can run down the list. We did ask, and a magnet school was not on the list. I don't know how we can possibly use this building when it was open. One, it's a pretty inefficient in terms of size for schools that operate today. It's, I think it's like a 200 capacity. I mean, Melinda can probably verify that. But we were also offering shuttle services at Rutherford and Stonebridge to try to get students to go to Withrow to fill them. And that was an additional cost, taking away money from other students in the district to try to fill a building that was not where the students were. And that is fact that we were doing those shuttles. So I know that this is an emotional issue, but for me, this is an absolute demographic reality of where we are. The graphs that was shared tonight, they include students in the district today, but if they don't include students, it's universal. It's not including students in the South that we're not capturing. It's not including students we're not capturing today in the West, in the East, in the North, anywhere. So to me, I just think we have to serve students as best as we can where they are. We can't do it all the time, but this school is just so outside of where our population is. And if that changes in 20 years, if that changes someday, a future board will address that. And I'm confident that those students will be taken care of. But today, And for a long time, there haven't been people there. And there aren't projected to be students there. And there isn't a plan in the Hugo City city comp plan out to 2040. So I just don't know, again, we're not going to agree. We're not going to agree, so.
Director Riley.
Thank you. There's lots of accusations that have just been made towards me at this table, and I really don't appreciate untruthful things being said, and I really wish people would check themselves before they did so. First of all, I have the data. I have it in this, if you would like to see this afterwards, about the attrition of the CDT. I have never denied any of the participants on it that they weren't there in all good intentions. That was never my qualm. My qualm was with the way that it was facilitated. It wasn't with those that were asked to participate in their own person. It did have an attrition rate of almost 70%. Also, you tell me that I have never supported anything in the South. And you make that accusation time and time again. That is not true. And I've always said that if the voters chose to expand Brookview, I would absolutely support that. I do not support a non-voter approved levy for this. To be honest, I really want the students, and I have said this and posted this for years since I campaigned. I want that experience in Brookview to be the best educational experience and have the best outcomes possible. And the data that I have supported that in keeping schools smaller and intimate. And that is what I would love their educational experience to be. And I support that for every school in this district, no matter which building it is. And I have always supported a new building for Lake Elmo, or renovations, or whatever was decided on to improve on Lake Elmo. So please be careful with your words.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. I was just going to say the exact same thing. I voted for the bond, Annie. I voted for Brookview to be built. I just didn't want it financed the way it was financed. I don't have any problem, and I've never had any problem with adding on to the school. I had a problem with the way it's financed. I wanted the taxpayers to be able to have a voice, because the taxpayers, I personally, as a taxpayer, feel there was a bait and switch with the last bond. We were told, this can happen for Withrow, this can happen for Oak Park, this can happen for Marine. And so I voted for the bond. And then what happened? Those schools got closed. So doing something without asking the taxpayer, to me, jeopardizes future projects. That's why I didn't want it financed the way it was financed. I didn't want a non-voter approved levy. It wasn't that I didn't want the addition. And I have always been in favor of building a new Lake Elmo. I was on the planning committee that was before that, called the Long-Term Facility Planning Committee. And that's what we wanted to do too, was to build a new Lake Elmo. So for you to say those two statements to me is very offensive and not true. And I would appreciate it if you didn't do that again.
Director Onken.
So we're kind of at a point where we know we all disagree. We're in the part of doing the one-upsmanship. Can we just agree that we're going to disagree and move on? Because,
And stop insulting each other, yeah.
well, but you're all doing it.
I didn't insult anyone.
Stop it.
Okay, let's
Just
stop.
Let's be adults here, for crying out loud. And I'm not just calling you out.
Director Onken has the floor.
I mean, good Lord. We're here to make decisions for our kids, and it's like, well, let's see if I can one-up you and one-up you and one-up you. Come on. I mean, it's embarrassing to sit here like this. So we agreed to disagree. We know we're going to have to vote on this. It's going to be a 5-2 vote, most likely. Let's move on. If the community decides to not vote for the levy, that's their choice. If they're taking it out on us, that's the bad choice. We need to support our kids. That's what the levy's for. If they want to take it out on us, don't vote us back in.
but this one-upsmanship has just got to come to an end. I mean, I'm embarrassed to sit here.
I know that you're looking for guidance from us tonight, Superintendent Lansfeld, and I can see that most everybody has spoken on this issue, and I think it's pretty clear where people stand on this. Just to be clear that, you know, I also support the idea of putting these two properties on the market. I just don't see that, you know, if you look at the comp plan for Hugo, there just is no growth in that area that we are going to need to serve. And we already have more than 300 seats open in our schools that are, you know, Rutherford, Lily Lake, and Stonebridge. There just isn't a need for capacity. And yes, it might be true that the annual costs are not all that big, especially when you're considering that we're a $100 million entity. What worries me is what happens if we have to replace a roof there. That, I think, could easily be $1 million, and we'd have to pay for that out of our general fund. It makes no sense to hold on to a building that we have no need for. And in the meantime, buildings deteriorate if they're not used. So I believe, I agree with some of the other members on the board, we ought to go forward and see what happens. Put these properties on the market and see what happens.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the superintendent evaluation. So Superintendent Lansfeld had asked for some feedback on her performance. She went through a rather extensive performance evaluation last November, I believe it was. And I think she was evaluated on maybe, 10 or 11 different, in 10 or 11 different categories. We had decided that she didn't really need to go through such an extensive evaluation this time, but she did want some feedback. And so she chose 3 of those categories to have us evaluate her on. And so all of the board members filled out individual evaluations, and then we had a closed work session on May 20, or a closed meeting on May 27th to discuss that. And the school board chair is required to give a summary of what happened during that discussion. And so I am just going to read to you a summary of what we had to say on these 3 different categories. The first standard is school district operations, and this encompasses facilities, transportation, food service, technology, maintenance, and personnel. All of these categories were thrown off in the past 6 months because the pandemic forced the district into distance learning. Superintendent Lansfeld's operations team, particularly in the area of technology and food service, worked tirelessly throughout this period, quickly recreating how they served students. Transportation and facilities continue to be pressure spots for the district. Lapses in service by a new transportation provider tested her management abilities in recent months and will test her skills anew as students return to school this fall. Likewise, the district faces significant issues with overcrowding of its facilities in the south part of the district. She and her team will need to be inventive to be able to accommodate the crowding while leading the community forward with a potential bond referendum next year. Standard number 2, human resources. It encompasses internal communications, personnel concerns, delegation of duties, visibility and approachability, hiring and staff development, collective bargaining, and evaluation. Superintendent Lansfeld is an outgoing individual. She is visible, open, and enthusiastic within the district and has taken on the challenge of being more visible in the community as well. She has been plagued, however, by unusually high turnover within top administration, a circumstance that was forced on her by the actions of other individuals. Retention of key personnel must be a priority to provide much-needed continuity in leadership positions. Superintendent Lansfeld has been able to hire more people of color in leadership positions. Considering the dramatic increase of students of color in this district during the past decade, this emphasis should continue as well as her efforts to encourage employees to be cognizant of the issues of diversity and inclusion when dealing with students. Superintendent Lansfeld is improving in her efforts with collective bargaining. Her efforts in that regard were hampered by a lack of consistent support, again brought on by the upheaval in district top leadership in the past year. Standard 3, student support. This encompasses student engagement and feedback, student attendance, support for students, student discipline, culture of cooperation, school safety and security, emotional health, and social needs. Many of these standards were not easily observed by board members because distance learning kept those students at home. However, the need to support students' social emotional needs will become critically important following the pandemic and what may have been inconsistent learning models. Some students may require extra academic help to catch up, while others will need extra social emotional support. This will be a challenge area for Superintendent Lansfeld going forward. She and her team were able to navigate difficult situations this spring involving walkouts and demonstrations by students with competing philosophies. Summary. This was an unprecedented year, and Superintendent Lansfeld handled herself with professionalism under pressure. Some competencies were not demonstrated simply because of the circumstances of the year. The board looks forward to Superintendent Lansfeld and her team being able to leave crisis management behind and return to a more normalized district leadership model that allows for a more strategic, planful approach to the long-term needs of the district. And I just wanted to add that Superintendent Lansfeld also gave us a rather extensive list of all of the things that her team has accomplished in the last year, as well as looking forward as to what they plan to accomplish for the coming year. So we really appreciated getting that information. The board is going to be meeting in another 2 weeks, I think 2 weeks, to discuss board goals. And arising out of that, I think that we will then figure out what sort of goals you would like to pursue for the next 6 months. And as long as we didn't really have those goals here during the last 6 months. But if we can establish those going forward, I think that's probably the best way to do evaluations going forward. So, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the action items on our agenda. The first one is policy approval of policy 701, 701.1, 702, 703, 704, 706, 714, and 721. Dr. Cherry.
Thank you, Chair Petrie, members of the board, Superintendent Lansfeld. This evening, we are coming before you with a recommendation to adopt 5 new policies and 3 revised policies. For the past 2 months, we have been coming to you with first reads and second reads of these policies. The establishment and adoption of a school district budget is a new policy. It was brought to you on April 8th and April 22nd, along with the modification of the school district budget, the accounting policy, as well as the annual audit policy. All of these policies follow the MSBA, or Minnesota School Board Association model policies. After extensive review and asks for input, there have been no changes to the model policies. Starting on April 22nd, we brought a new round of policies to you, development and maintenance of an inventory of fixed assets accounting system, which is a new policy, along with some revised policies, the acceptance of gifts and fund balances policies. These again are MSBA model policies, and after that first read on April 22nd and a second read on May 13th, there have been no revisions to those model policies. The final policy is the Uniform Grant Guidance Policy regarding federal revenue sources. This is policy 721, came to you on May 13th, again on May 27th. There were no recommendations again to these model policies through the first 2 readings, And at this time, we are asking for your motion to adopt these policies as they are presented in your packet.
Thank you. Can I get a motion? Director Hocker. Is there a second? Director Onken. Discussion. Director Hocker.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. As Chair of the Policy Committee, I thought I'd take just a moment to review kind of the overarching goal and philosophy that we've been taking so far since we've started our policy work this year. We are bringing 9 out of 10. You might have noticed that one of our policies has been removed just from this flight, and that is 705. That will be coming back to the board in hopefully a very short time. We got some staff input from our finance department and wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit further. Excuse me. So we need to bring that back to you guys in a little bit. Our goal in sending this flight through without 705 is to get it hopefully passed tonight so that it is in place for our new fiscal year. That'll be beginning in July. And just so that I've said this before, but as a reminder that our finance department is governed by our state and federal statutes. School district policy really just acts as a bridge of understanding between what the law establishes for the finance department and wording that the board and the public can better understand what is really going on. Not having these policies in place does not mean that our district was not following the law in any way, but we as a committee feel that these policies will help those outside the finance department see a more comprehensive and accessible set of expectations in an effort to curb misunderstanding and distrust that have occurred in recent years, thus enhancing transparency for all. Our policy committee has been working diligently with MSBA and our legal team and our staff to ensure that these policies are clear, non-conflicting, purposeful, and not unnecessarily redundant for those tasked with adhering to them. As Dr. Cherry was just mentioning, these are model policies. Certain model policies came with a little note that they really shouldn't be tinkered with too much because they are heavily based in statute. Other ones you can tinker with a little bit more because they're partially based in statute. But just for clarification tonight, everything in front of you are straight up model policies. We have not done anything to these. And one other kind of tidbit, we had mentioned early on that the Finance and Ops Committee would also possibly be involved after speaking with the chair and also getting some feedback from MSBA that we can't do a whole lot with these policies. With wording, it was agreed upon that the policy committee should really shoulder the work of policy recommendation, and then our discussion would be at the board table. However, our Finance and Ops Committee will possibly be looking at the updated procedures once they are completed, hopefully later this summer, and once we have these new policies in place. So that's kind of the update on where we are on these new policies being adopted tonight.
Okay, questions or comments? Director Riley.
Thank you. I kind of want to disagree a little bit because I did have a recommendation for change on policy 701 about the language in there again at the beginning, and no action was taken, so I did raise question to that. Also, if we can go back to the October 26, 17 meeting, the initial meeting of policy transformation, when all of this started and we started transforming policies or our current policies into MSBA policies, you know, at about 41, 46 in that meeting, the chair of that committee said they will, however as needed and wherever necessary, take these policies and adapt them to Stillwater. And I want to say that because that is the intent. MSBA is MSBA. We are not one singular district in Minnesota. We are individual communities, and our policies should reflect our communities. If we have a need for 721.1, we should have a 721.1. But just because MSBA says so, they're not the law of the land, right? Why else would we need a board? Just get rid of us all. You let MSBA do everything. There's no need for us. So I'm really I am a little, I'm a little irked at the lack of allowing policies to reflect the need of the community.
Can I respond to that?
Director Hockert.
Thank you. Just in response to Director Riley's concerns, your comment about 701, we definitely came back the next meeting and did discuss that 701 has a line in it, and I did offer two kind of options where we could add wording, which would further embed 721.1 because it was in fact in conflict with that policy, or we would be revoking it so that it would no longer be on our books. And after that discussion, we went back to our committee and we did decide that the revocation avenue seemed to be in what more board members were interested in. So that's kind of where that discussion went. And as to the comments on MSBA, MSBA is a resource for us, and one of the advantages of using these policies as is that they are vetted through their legal team instead of ours. We are already paying for our membership in MSBA, and so this is, in my opinion, a good use of our resources to use their legal team to vet it. They will also be monitoring the statutes that are mentioned in their model policies, and if anything does change in those statutes, which could break a policy, they would be informing us as members, and then we could bring it to the board at that time. And one final comment, I think you'll be very interested in 705 and your idea of kind of making our policies fit Stillwater, because that's kind of what our discussion is right now with 705, is there a better way to have that policy really fit this district? So I appreciate all of your comments. Thank you.
Director Sherman.
Just so I'm clear and so that the community is clear, this in no way changes the fact that we are, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this number has increased. I think that the superintendent or assistant superintendent or John could do this, but John Tyne, we can approve contracts. You have a range, right? And some school boards don't approve contracts until it hits like, I think 175,000 is the maximum threshold that boards can approve contracts. We in Stillwater we vote to do 50 as our threshold. Is that correct? That will not change with these policies. We will still have that. Everything comes to the board that is over 50, correct?
Yeah, as far as unless the policy changes.
Right.
That's what we do.
And that was a board vote, and that's in place for it. We vote on that every year.
Yes.
Correct, Director
So I just want the community to know that we're still gonna have, if it's over 50, it's still gonna come back to the board. And I look forward to seeing the procedures that the staff is gonna write so that they can adhere to our policies. And certainly they know that we are very interested in the transparency on the financial side. And so I would expect that their procedures are going to reflect that will of the board. So.
Can I respond? Director Sherman, that's correct. So at the organizational meeting in January, the board passed a resolution to indicate that the authority the board delegated authority for contracts under $50,000 that are within the school district budget to the superintendent and the director of finance. Any contracts above that amount or outside of the approved budget would come before the board for approval.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of the motion to approve these policies indicate by raising your hand, saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Okay, motion passes. Motion passes unanimously, right? Okay, thank you. Okay, the next item is revoke policy 321.1. Dr. Cherry, did you want to say
Thank
something
you,
about
Chair
that?
Petrie. Yes, members of the board. This is really a continuation of the conversation we were just having regarding the flight of finance policies. On April 8th, when we brought policy 701, the adoption of the school district budget, to the board for its first reading, we did have comments from Director Riley that this policy was in conflict to a statement within 701. The statement where there is conflict is in item 4C of policy 701, which we all just adopted, that the superintendent or the superintendent's designee is authorized to make payments of claims or salaries authorized by the adopted or amended budget prior to the school board approval. And so adoption of policy 701 conflicts with policy 721.1. That was brought up at that April 8th meeting. And then when we came back for a second read on April 22nd, 721.1 was also in the packet at that time. And there was, I would say, a robust discussion about what do we do about this possible conflict. And it was brought up that one of the options might be to revoke policy 721.1. Just a couple of other items is the resolution, and this is in response to the question that Director Sherman had asked just in the last conversation, is there is a little bit of redundancy between the intent of 721.1 and the resolution that was passed by the board at the January 7th organizational meeting. And at that meeting, the resolution that was passed authorizes the superintendent and the director of finance to lease, purchase, or contract for goods and services that are within the district's budget that was approved by the board and do not exceed $50,000. So any lease, purchase, or contract exceeding $50,000 or an item outside of the board's approved budget must be submitted to the board for approval. So with that, the board already has identified that that $50,000 threshold still remains. That is an annual decision that's made by the board. So at this time, we are making a recommendation to revoke policy 721.1.
Okay, can I get a motion to Director Onken? Is there a second? Director Porvani. Director Hockert, did you
I
want
have
to
a few
speak to
more,
this?
a few more comments. Thank you, Chair Petrie. Again, I just want to do a quick little summary of kind of how we've gotten to this point, and reflection on 721.1. So, I kind of teed this up a little bit already in our previous discussion that April 22nd, we had a robust discussion, certainly, at the board table regarding how 721.1 is working in practice. It was a new policy. It was only implemented in December of 2020 in coordination with a set of procedures that Director Riley had written. The policy set a new threshold of $50,000 for contracts to come to the board and requires staff to complete a cover sheet indicating the nature of the purchase and if the costs would be one-time or recurring. The policy also requires staff to bring all contracts under $50,000 before the board at each meeting so the board could be kept informed of every contract, including non-monetary ones. Initially, the staff were receptive to the procedure and policy, although some concerns were raised around the amount of time and resources needed to fulfill this new policy and procedure. Since that time, our staff have lived this policy, and the anticipated burden of additional reporting for contracts of the under $50,000 in particular proved correct. In the April 22nd meeting, Finance Director John Tyne explained that his staff spent about 6 hours preparing the report that was given less than 2 minutes of attention at the board table. Furthermore, the additional reports required are redundant, although arguably more convenient for the board and the community, as all of these expenditures show up in our monthly check register and in disbursements as well. we have just approved a comprehensive set of new financial policies in the 700 series, which we believe are still serve the intention of policy 721.1, but with a more strategic use of staff time. What won't be changing in 721, if it is in fact revoked, we are still delegating expenditures above $50,000 to come to the board thanks to our January resolution. That set that resolution for $50,000 this year, but could be changed in the future, but that's not what we are recommending tonight. And we will still be using the expenditure approval form in that packet, as it would be referenced in the procedures, since some board members have requested to keep that. What will be changing if it is revoked is adding that added report on contracts under $50,000 that are within the board authorized budget. We will no longer having that report at every board meeting, but all contracts come before the board on a monthly disbursement packet, so we can still all keep track of them. We will still need to follow up with the finance department if questions do arise, but we are not going to be expecting staff to prepare a report for us at every board meeting for those under $50,000 expenditures. Procedures will need to be updated this summer. Once the procedures are all in place, they will need to be approved by our auditors, and staff will be involved in that process, as well as finance and ops will be looking them over. We are committed to rebuilding trust and transparency between the board and the district administration by creating clear expectations and communication through policy, which is the real work of the board. We must then trust the professionals hired to do their job. When we as a board stray from our mission, it will cost us far more in the long run in terms of reputation and attracting future talent to our district. Revoking 721.1 is a step in this direction, as was the passage of the rest of the 700 series earlier tonight. Thank you.
Director Riley.
So many things. It's absolutely opposite of closer to transparency. I'm a little surprised with the amount of things that have come forward and the timing things have come forward and the risk that continues to be brought forward. There was a reason for this, and you were not on the board. You don't understand. I was not asked. Director Weisberg probably wasn't asked. We were not receiving information we needed to make decisions. We were not receiving background information. Those things are very important when you, as a board, are responsible in the end. As far as the 6 hours and the dramatization of the 6 hours of work for 2 minutes, I have an issue with that, because the board never told administration what their process should be behind the scenes. The board never asked administration for all of that packet, all of the covers, all of the things. That was done on their own. So that would have been an internal conversation within that department. That has absolutely nothing to do with the expectations of being transparent to the community. And it's funny, you talk about the disbursements, but the community doesn't even get to see them, right? And I'm told to be quiet, and I'm not supposed to ask questions at the board table. So it's interesting. The movement towards transparency is absolutely opposite, and there is a reason that the process was in place is because of consistency. The amount of questions I would have as to, am I supposed to give you this? Do you not give you this? Or are you entitled to this? To make decisions as a board member, I need the background information. I have to read the background information. I have to understand what I'm voting on. That is a big part of this whole policy. And I think this is a grave mistake you're making. And instead of listening to those that have been there and have been working with it, you're choosing just basically to undo everything the prior board has done.
Director Onken.
I agree with Director Riley that it would be nice if there was a way for us to get the disbursement register for people to be able to see, so they could ask questions if they have them. I think that will go a long way in the transparency thing. At the same time, I don't know of another district around this area that uses policy like this, and they seem to be able to function well. And I think we can do that as well. I think the other policies, 700 policies that are being put in place, provide for many of these same things that what this one is asking for. This seems redundant. It also seems to be something that is probably a little bit of a hindrance to some of our staff. They work within a budget. They know what their budget is. We don't have issues with people embezzling money from this district. So I think this is a good move. I think we're in a good spot here to do this tonight. As I said, we have other policies in place that cover many of these things already. And we've heard Superintendent Lansfeld say, we want to be transparent. They're going to do everything they can to be transparent. Thank you.
Director Hockert.
Thank you. In response to a couple comments made earlier, one of the challenges with 721.1 that I heard from staff, that I don't think it necessarily came out at the board meeting, but it was comments that I'd heard, that it is a very difficult policy to follow. And Director Riley, I think, just highlighted that point, that the staff was not directed to spend 6 hours on these reports. However, they weren't sure exactly how much time they were supposed to be spending on these reports. So they took it upon themselves to do what they felt was the maximum amount of work that they could be expected of them. That lack of clarification and clear expectation in this policy is one of the flaws in the policy itself and the way it was written. In some ways, it is like excessively vague in some of the wording that we highlighted in the April 22nd meeting, like defining what a contract is versus, there was another word that was used in terms of contract. There were two words that were used kind of interchangeably, but then in other ways it seems very, very specific. So it's just a difficult policy to follow for our staff when policies are supposed to be very clear and overarching and allow staff a scaffold from which to build their own procedures to make it work for the district. So that's one of the concerns that that is being addressed in revoking 721.1. And just as a side note, I did actually ask you about 721.1. We had a conversation before I was sat on the board. I also talked to Director Weisberg as well. And both of you shared your thoughts on 721.1, but apparently you didn't remember that. So I did have information on kind of where it came from and your perspective on 721.1. And I remember that conversation very clearly. Thank you.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. I think this is a giant step backwards in a very important time. I think I've already said that before. I think in asking for this to be moved to a report item, if there are issues with the policy, we could have worked on those issues. We talked about it Finance Committee, just like the disbursement report comes to the board, could the contracts come as part of the consent agenda? And so then if people had questions about them, then they could ask. So you would need to have all of them researched prior to coming to the board. We talked about a lot of these things. So the fact that it just landed as something to be revoked without us working it out, like we can work out problems with policies if we have problems, reading them 3 times, the fact that this just came to be revoked seems odd to me. Also, I'm sorry, I just lost my whole train of thought. Okay. We have a lot of policies that are redundant now. We just brought back all the BGP policies and those things. So to pick on this one policy and say there's some redundancy without getting any opportunity to fix that problem doesn't make sense. And we are going backwards in a time where people need to know we are watching your money, we are being very careful, we're doing everything we can to spend it properly. And for this to go away, we had a speaker tonight who I've never even seen who said that bothered her, and I don't think she's going to be alone.
Director Sherman.
I'd like to call the question.
Okay. All right.
Do you have to second that? I don't know
Yes.
if we do or not. I'll second it if we need to. Do
All right.
we have to vote?
Yeah. All right, we're calling the question.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of calling the question signify by raising your hand, saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, we are calling the question on the revocation of 721.1. All those in favor of revoking 721.1 signify by raising your hand and saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
All right, motion passes 5-2. All right, the final item on the agenda is the board chair report. I have nothing for tonight, and with that, this meeting is adjourned.